Chapter 756. Of course, the Cui family was going to lose money. Their brains were damaged. Using a large amount of jewelry and silver to exchange for a bunch of worthless junk. If they didn't lose out, who would? However, everyone knew that this couldn't be blamed on the Cui family. After all, since ancient times, colored glass had been an extremely precious treasure. This was not only reflected in its value, but also its significance. Crystal clear and radiant, it was already very attractive. It was also a Buddhist treasure, symbolizing good fortune. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to see it in their lifetime. Who would have thought that such a good treasure would become cabbages on the side of the road overnight? Previously, it was worth 3,000 taels of silver, but now it could only be used as a token to buy clothes. Buy one and get two free. The difference was like heaven and earth. No matter how smart one was, they wouldn't have thought of it. No wonder the Cui family suffered a loss. The rarer something was, the more expensive it was. It was all because in such a short period of time, too much colored glass had appeared in the capital, and the price of colored glass was dropping by the day. The crystal was clear and colorful, and it was beautiful, but that kind of crystal clear and colorful thing was everywhere in the capital, so who would want it? This time, the nobles in the capital were all dumbfounded. A few months ago, they spent thousands of taels of silver to buy the colored glass wares. In the blink of an eye, it was worthless. No one would feel good about this. This time, they were screwed over by the Wang family. The monks were equally dumbfounded. Other people's colored glass wares were at most 1,000 taels of silver, but their colored Buddha statues were worth no less than 10,000 taels of silver. There were countless people who secretly complained about the royal family and the Wang family, but they didn't dare to show it on the surface. After all, among the two families, either one was extremely powerful. Even the nobles couldn't afford to offend them. However, when they heard that the head of the Wang family smashed hundreds of colored glass wares in front of everyone, the complaints in their hearts lessened and turned into mockery and schadenfreude. The Wang family actually still had so many colored glass wares. They must be thinking of making a few more windfalls in the future. Otherwise, why would they hold the Colored Glass Appreciation Convention? Now that colored glass was worthless. Although they suffered a loss, compared to the Wang family's loss, it was simply a drop in the bucket. People were always like this. When they were unlucky, they couldn't help but feel better when they knew that others were even more unlucky than them. Of course, it was not all a loss for them. The colored glaze that the royal family and the Wang family sold to them were all donations. Everyone was registered, and a large portion of it went to the national treasury. At least, it left a record with the emperor, which could prove that they had done their best for the country. The silver was not all for naught. The Cui family was different. According to the calculations of some people, the Cui family's loss this time was at least 4 million taels of silver. What kind of concept was 4 million taels of silver? It was almost a third of the Jing kingdom's annual tax revenue. No matter how deep the Cui clan's resources were, this number was still a heavy blow to them. It was so heavy that it hurt their bones and shook their foundation. Without many years of recuperation, it would be impossible for them to recover. At this moment, everyone understood what was going on. The Wang family, the Cui family, the big and small dignitaries in the capital, and even the royal family, were all fooled by those foreign merchants. Ever since lioli became a common commodity, those foreign merchants disappeared without a trace. They suddenly appeared and then disappeared, taking away a large amount of silver. They completely ignored some people in the capital, and for a long time, they could only tighten their belts and live their lives. Damn foreign merchants! So much so that this sentence became a classic that people in the capital often said. Where those foreign merchants went, even after many years, was still an unsolved mystery. Hee, I want a house to bring me here. We agreed that my house will be opposite yours. Yi Zichen said. I have to go back, bring Xiao Lian to get married. Looking at the laughing figures in front of him, Li Yi waved his hand and said, You can ask Mr. Lu for these things, he will arrange it for you. As long as they earned enough points, they would be able to exchange for what they needed. Be it silver, houses, or even pointers from top experts, they were all clearly marked. This was the rule of the Lu alliance. From the beginning, Li Yi did not intend to tie them down with friendship or anything else. Tangible benefits were the strongest ties to maintain a relationship. Of course, everything would not be so unreasonable. Mississippi Lu didn't know these things, but Lu Luo knew how to win people's hearts. Before they left, Li Yi reminded them worriedly, Remember, don't talk to people like this when you go out, or you will be beaten to death. Remember to tell them. Now in the capital, foreign merchants were hated by everyone. If they were discovered, it would not be as simple as a beating. I'm sorry, I'm used to it. A man touched his head awkwardly and left with the others. They didn't need to report to Li Yi about the matter of Lioli. But these people were different. They were the ones in charge of contacting the Qi Kingdom. The news of Lioli's worthless value would soon reach the Qi Kingdom, and they needed to go there to make some arrangements. Young master, isn't it too much to earn so much money? Fong scratched his head and couldn't force out a complete sentence. 2 years ago, he was still risking his life for a few copper coins. How long had it been? The amount of money he had passed through was already in the millions. When he thought about it, there was always a feeling of unease in his heart. It is a little too much. Li Yi nodded. Although this method of earning money was fast, it seemed to be similar to cheating and swindling people. If one cheated too many people, they would suffer retribution. However, the old emperor was personally involved in this matter. Without his approval, there wouldn't be a Lioli Bazaar. Even if there was retribution, the reputation of the royal family and the Wang family was much greater than that of the Li family. The soup is ready. I'll go take a look. Li Yi walked towards the kitchen and waved at him. Go ahead. When you pass by Willow Lane, help me get some osmanthus cakes. They were now in the new residence in the capital. This place was not far from the School of Mathematics and the Imperial Palace. The environment was quiet and secluded, and it was some distance away from the noisy market. There was a slope behind the house. The slope was not steep, but standing at the top of the slope, one could overlook the surrounding scenery. The most eye-catching thing was the artificial lake of the School of Mathematics and Mathematics. At dusk, it would feel good to hold Rui's hand and take a walk there. What he had to do every day was to wake up early. Before the morning market dispersed, he would cross a few streets to buy some fresh vegetables. Sometimes, he would carry a fresh fish and stop at Willow Lane to rest for a while. When the sun rose to 45 degrees Celsius, he would return home to prepare dinner. He didn't need to do any of the procedures. At most, a maidservant would help him pick the vegetables and light the fire. At this time, Yongning would bring a small stool and sit down to watch. The Tsundra Lolita wanted to help but was always a nuisance. This kind of life was good enough. Li Yi scooped a bowl of soup and tasted it. The taste wasn't too strong. He decided to let it boil for a while longer. He only drank a mouthful of soup, but he didn't want to waste it. He placed it on the stone table outside and walked to the back to call Xiaofan to drink it. The soup was for Rui to keep her body healthy, but it was also good for ordinary women. It could beautify their skin, enhance their breasts, and stimulate their breasts. Little maidservants should drink more of it. This was the secret recipe of the old monk Tan Yin. It was said that it was for keeping her body healthy. Li Yi found a similar recipe in a book, but it had a few more effects. Xiao Huan couldn't be found. She might have gone somewhere with the Tsundra Lolita. When Li Yi returned, he saw someone sitting at the stone table. The bowl of soup had already been emptied. This soup tastes good. It took a long time. It's good for the body. Li Yi looked at the middle-aged man sitting there and smiled. Drink more if you like it. Chapter 757. This was the second time that Li Yi saw the old emperor leave the palace. He was still the same as when he was in Ning Wang Fu, wearing an ordinary robe. His face was gentle and he looked like an uncle next door. No one knew that the person in front of them was the most powerful uncle in the entire Jing kingdom. The old emperor's illness was special. It was very dangerous when it acted up, so dangerous that there was a possibility that he would die every time. But normally, if one paid attention, there was no difference between him and a normal person. He did not come alone. The eldest princess was standing next to him, wearing a slim dress. He did not know if it was because of the dress, or if her figure had become better, but her figure seemed to be more exquisite than a few days ago. Moving here was for the sake of peace and quiet. There were not many servants in the residence, but even if they met, they would not dare to stop them. So the old emperor had the opportunity to drink the soup that she prepared to trick Xiao Huan to drink. Changde came out of the kitchen with 2 bowls of soup. Li Yi glared at him. This old guy really did not treat himself as an outsider. Fortunately, he had his own thoughts and even made a portion for Xiao Huan and Rui. Otherwise, there would not be much left for Rui. Jing Emperor picked up another bowl, and Changde handed the other bowl to the eldest princess. When they came over, they saw Li Yi put down the soup and went to the back. Jing Emperor drank a few mouthfuls before asking, "Did you make this soup?" He knew that Li Yi had good cooking skills. Because Shaoning often talked about it in his ears, he had the chance to taste it today. He was surprised by his cooking skills. It was probably not much different from the imperial chefs in the palace. Changde looked at Li Yi and asked, "This soup, is it suitable for your Majesty's body to drink more?" Li Yi had once told him about His Majesty's illness. There were many things that needed to be avoided on a daily basis, and diet was an important part. He was worried that Li Yi would forget, so he asked about it. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's okay. This soup is very nourishing. It's okay to drink a few more bowls." This soup was good for women, and there was no harm for men to drink it. It was just a supplement. The Princess Royal had a good figure, but it was only good. Compared to Mississippi Lu, the parts that should be curvy were curvy, but the parts that should be curvy were not curvy enough. She should drink more. Placate the miscarriage and stimulate the breast milk? The spoon that Jing Di had picked up stopped in the air, and the soup spilled on his lapel. Cough. Cough. Emingzu put down the bowl. She seemed to have choked and her face was already red. She glared at Li Yi and hurriedly took out a handkerchief to wipe her mouth. Li Yi had never seen her act like a little girl. In fact, he had always regarded the swift and decisive princess as a man. Jing Di put down the spoon, obviously not intending to drink anymore. Emingzu also put down the bowl and secretly looked at Li Yi with a hint of anger. "Your Majesty, why are you?" Li Yi changed the topic at the right time. Jing Di looked at him and asked, "Why? You, the dean of the academy, is allowed to be lazy at home, but we cannot go out of the palace to relax?" Li Yi quickly said, "Steal half a day of leisure. The palace is like a cage. Your Majesty often goes out to relax. It is also good for your illness." Emingzu glanced at him. He was the only one who dared to say that the palace was a cage in front of her imperial father. "Steal half a day of leisure?" Jing Di looked at him and said with a tone of dissatisfaction, "We think you are stealing half a day of leisure, right?" Jealousy. It was obvious that he was jealous. He obviously saw that he was living a comfortable life and deliberately came to find trouble. Li Yi was too lazy to pay attention to him and stood aside without saying anything. Jing Di looked left and right and asked, "Where are Yongning and Shaoning?" Li Yi pointed in a certain direction and said, "At the amusement park." He ordered people to build the amusement park. Several houses were connected and the ground was covered with soft mats. There were rocking cars, merry-go-rounds, slides, swings, and other amusement facilities. It was also the favorite place of Yongning, Shaoning, and Duan Wu. Although there were no exciting projects such as roller coasters and skydiving machines, in this era of extreme lack of entertainment, this was already considered super luxurious. "Take us to see." Jing Di seemed to be very interested in this place and stood up. Li Yi originally chose this place because he liked the environment here. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a small park. There was running water in the garden, and the water was so clear that the bottom could be seen. Fish were playing in the water. Although the layout was not very luxurious, it was simple and did not lose its atmosphere. After passing through a bamboo forest path, their field of vision became open again. They could hear bursts of laughter coming from a row of houses. The arrogant Lolita was playing on a swing, and a palace maid was gently pushing it behind her. When she saw Li Yi coming in, she said loudly, Sir, you push me." "They are not pushing high." Li Yi walked over, stopped the swing, and carried her down from the swing. The arrogant Lolita pouted and was about to express her dissatisfaction. Suddenly, she opened her eyes wide and saw a figure coming in from outside the door. She ran over in surprise and said, "Father, why are you here?" Yongning also came over and stood quietly beside Jing Di. Jing Di touched their little heads and said, "If Father didn't come, my Shaoning and Yongning would have almost forgotten Father." The arrogant Lolita twisted her body and said in a sweet voice, "Oh, how could Shaoning forget Father?" Jing Di looked at the two little girls, and a trace of sadness appeared on his face. He was their father, but he was also the emperor, the ruler of a country. Since they were young, he did not and could not fully fulfill the responsibilities of a father. It was no wonder that they always wanted to run out of the palace. The arrogant Lolita was full of joy for her father to leave the palace. She grabbed his arm and said, "Father, let's go outside to play. There are a lot of delicious food and fun things on the street. I will take father to the brothel to watch the show." "It is wonderful." Jingdi pinched her little face and said with a smile. "Okay, father will accompany you to have fun today." "Father is so good." The arrogant Lolita shook his arm and looked at Li Yi. She said, "As good as teacher." Li Yi felt that the arrogant Lolita thought that teacher was good because teacher would cook delicious food for her, play with her, and take her to watch interesting shows. Other children could get married at the age of 13. Because she grew up in the palace and was doted on by the emperor and 2 concubines, her temperament was similar to that of a child. The aged emperor was dragged by Shou Ning through the streets and alleys, sweeping through the crowd. Although there was only Changde following behind them, Li Yi could guarantee that if there was even the slightest movement from his side, within a breath's time, this place would be surrounded by 3 layers of people. Li Yi and the eldest princess were walking behind. He turned his head and looked at her. He asked, "How is the cooperation with the family of generals?" Li Emingzu said lightly, "It has just begun. The military provisions are very important. You have to visit the family of generals more often." "How about the academy? Is everything okay?" "Everything is as usual. Although it is a female academy, we still have to pay attention to it. If there is nothing else, we should hold more parent-teacher meetings to let the parents understand the situation. It will also put them at ease." The arrogant Lolita was always short-lived. After pestering Jingdi for a while, she pulled Yong Ning along to play. Jingdi had a few palace guards follow them, and their footsteps finally slowed down. Li Emingzu looked at the smile on his face and thought for a moment. She said, "If there is nothing important, father might as well rest outside the palace for a few days." Li Yi was right. The palace looked glorious, but it was actually a cage. When she was in the palace, she had never seen her father show such a smile. Emperor Jing did not answer her. He looked at the group of children holding sugar-coated haws in their hands as they whizzed past the crowd. He shook his head and said, "When I was their age, I had already begun to study the scriptures. If I could let the children of poor families have books to read, the talents of the Jing kingdom would be inexhaustible in the future." Li Yi knew that the old emperor had wanted to break the situation where the court was almost controlled by the aristocratic families. From a long time ago, he had intentionally supported the students of poor families. However, due to various reasons, the results were very little. In this era, educational resources were very precious. They were often monopolized by the large clans with deep foundations. It was not easy for the poor to study. This directly led to the imperial court choosing officials from the aristocratic families. Only they had the ability to nurture outstanding disciples. However, this would cause the court to be filled with factions and complicated relationships. The court would be firmly controlled by the aristocratic families. This was not what a wise emperor wanted to see. For a wise emperor like the old emperor, what he was most concerned about was the poor people and the students of poor families. Li Yi crossed his arms and touched Mingzhu's shoulder. This was a rare opportunity. He had told her in detail how to support the children of poor families and break the monopoly of the aristocratic families in education. If he were to bring it up now, wouldn't he be saying it to the old emperor's heart? He had explained these routines clearly, and they only needed to follow the steps step by step. Emingsu glanced at him and thought that he was careless. She lowered her head and continued to think. Li Yi touched her again. Emingsu was still unmoved. Li Yi frowned and turned to look at her. This time, he used a little more force. Emingsu finally turned to look at him. When she saw that he was staring at her, she seemed to have thought of something. She blushed and glared at him. Then, she put some distance between them. This was a good opportunity to show off her talents in front of the old emperor. Li Yi wanted to talk to her about serious matters. What was with this blushing expression? What was this woman thinking about? Whether it was on the surface or in the dark, he had done enough for her. However, he couldn't always be the one to take the initiative, right? He was working himself to the bone, but she was enjoying herself up there. How could this be? She should at least take the initiative, right? Chapter 758. Hey, you have to move yourself. Bah, do you still remember the story I told you last time? Li Yi felt that he was facing a blockhead who could not understand anything. He looked at her and asked with a frown. Emingsu looked at him in confusion. What story? Li Yi reminded her. Woo! Mingzhu's heart skipped a beat. She subconsciously reached out to cover his mouth. She looked around and said, "Don't ever say such rebellious words again." Seeing that her father did not hear it, even if he heard the word Wu, he would not think of anything. This was a secret between the two of them. Only then did she feel slightly relieved. That matter could not be made known to outsiders, and even more so to his father. "What are you thinking about all day?" Li Yi pushed her hand away and looked at her unhappily. He said, "Open the imperial examination, put the poor in important positions, fill the court with gentlemen, and replace the aristocratic families. This is to share His Majesty's burden, not for you to imitate that woman. You didn't forget what I told you, did you?" Mingzhu shook her head. She looked at him and nodded as if she understood. Her father had been putting the poor in important positions, replacing the aristocratic families, and letting the young scholars from poor families enter the center of the court. In the face of aristocratic politics, the poor had always been suppressed. After entering the court, they would be loyal to the royal family, which could effectively change the current situation in the court. Her father had done some things in response to this, including establishing a mathematics academy and recruiting a large number of commoners. However, she knew that there were more things that could be done to further expand the advantages of the commoners. In the end, it could turn into the kind of situation that Li Yi described, where the court was filled with noblemen and the rivers were clear. Because these things were related to the woman surnamed Wu. This was something she did not dare to think about normally. At this moment, with Li Yi's reminder, she understood that a method was a method after all. It worked in that fictional story, and it could have the same effect in reality. A woman's mind was really hard to guess. Even if Li Yi never thought of the eldest princess as a woman, he still couldn't guess her thoughts. Fortunately, she finally understood his meaning. Li Yi took the tonghulu that the proud Lolita handed over. As he ate, he watched Princess Royal walk over and talk to Jing Emperor in a low voice. After eating 2 candied haws, he felt that something was wrong. Sour and sweet was what candied haws should taste like. The 2 candied haws he ate didn't taste sweet, only sour. When he looked down, it turned out that the sugar had already been licked clean. When he turned around, he saw that Sundra lowly covering her mouth and giggling at him. This little girl was becoming more and more impudent. After listening to Mingzhu's narration, Jing Emperor's eyebrows raised slightly. Then, he shook his head and said, "Opening a large number of official schools can allow more poor students to study, but the cost is too great. It's so great that the imperial court cannot afford it." There were some methods that he had already decided on after weighing them in his heart. However, when it came to finances, he still had to hesitate. Although the national treasury had a lot of income in the past few days, it was not to the extent that it could be squandered wantonly. Wars, natural disasters. There were many places that needed money. It was not easy to maintain the balance, and it could not be easily broken. Li Yi said solemnly, "No matter how poor we are, we can't be poor in education. No matter how bitter we are, we can't let our children suffer. They are the future of a country. They are related to the rise and fall of the country. They are like the sun in the morning, full of vigor and infinite potential. Now the Jing kingdom is ours, but the future of the Jing kingdom is still in their hands." Jing Emperor never despised the theory of governance that came from Li Yi's mouth. Moreover, these words were indeed what he was thinking. A large part of the reason why the imperial court was controlled by the aristocratic families was that they had a monopoly on education and books. It was too difficult for poor children to enter the imperial court without going through these aristocratic families. They could only rely on themselves. If all the children of poor families in the world could go to school and have books to read, this problem that had existed for thousands of years would be resolved in this dynasty. And this would be the first step for him to completely end the aristocratic politics. However, he did not have much time. It was still unknown whether he could completely eliminate some things in his lifetime. Jing Emperor shook his head and said, "I have also vigorously promoted the prefectural schools and the county schools. But you are not in the position to know how much it costs. A problem that can be solved with money is not a problem." Li Yi looked at Mingzhu and asked, "Your Highness, don't you think so?" The national treasury could not take out the extra money, but the Princess Royal could. It was useless for her to earn so much money. It was impossible for her to save all of it for her dowry. It would be better to build more Mingzhu Hope primary schools. At least, it would let the poor in the world remember her kindness. The plaque on the school should be custom-made and big, so that everyone would know that it was the Princess Royal who pitted them that they could study. What's more, she did not have to pay for this money. Li Yi had a plan in his heart. Maybe he could save more dowry for her so that they would not be friends in vain. Emingzu looked at him in a daze. She did not know what Li Yi was thinking, but she was sure that he was thinking about something. Jing Emperor did not delve into this issue because the Tsundere Lolita had already pulled him to the brothel to watch the show. Emingzu crossed her arms and looked at him. What do you want to do? Eat the emperor's salary and share the emperor's worries. Li Yi did not go in. He leaned against the wall of the brothel and said, Your Majesty has been supporting the poor. This is to solve the problem from the root. Emingzu thought about it and blinked her eyes. Do you have a salary? Li Yi thought carefully for a moment and found that he really did not have a salary. He did not have much money, and it was deducted because he got into trouble. The old emperor did not give him a salary at all. Then forget it. Li Yi waved his hand and was ready to go in to watch the show. He didn't even have a salary, so how could he worry about it? Whoever wanted to divide it, divide it. In the end, he did not step in and was grabbed by the eldest princess. Father's biggest headache is those big families that control the court. If we can help father share this worry, I will ask father to leave the palace to recuperate. Father should agree. Emingzu looked at him and said in a soft voice, Tell me, what should we do? Li Yi looked at her and corrected her, It's you who will share it, not me. Emingzu shook her head. It's the same. She was her, and he was himself. What did she mean by the same? It was a good conversation, but it suddenly became so ambiguous. It made the thin-skinned Li Yi blush. Li Yi looked at her. What should we do? Didn't you say it very clearly? Emingzu looked down. But the National Treasury doesn't have that much silver. Who said we need to use the National Treasury's silver? In their dreams. Li Yi pursed his lips. It was a rare opportunity. Of course, the fertile water would not flow into other people's fields. I don't have that much money. Emingzu shook her head. Then, she seemed to have thought of something and looked at Li Yi. Li Yi quickly waved his hand. Don't look at me. My family's money doesn't grow on trees. It's not easy to earn money. He patted her shoulder out of habit and squinted his eyes. Don't worry. There will be silver. What should be, there will be. Seeing a certain light in his eyes, Li Mingzhu's heart suddenly relaxed, and she became incomparably calm. Chapter 759. The opera being performed in the brothel was the classic, The Cowherd and the Weaver Maid. The Chow festival was coming up in a few days, and this kind of opera was very popular. The brothel was not the busiest during the day, but there were many people inside. More than half of the seats were occupied. At night, the entire place would be filled with people. Everyone's attention was attracted by the wonderful performance on the stage. No one noticed that in a secluded corner at the back, a pretty girl was excitedly telling the story of the cowherd and the weaver maid to a middle-aged man behind her. Although the opera was wonderful, the story told by the man was even more wonderful. The middle-aged man sat there, patiently listening to the girl. In his arms was a young girl. Occasionally, he would look at the stage with a satisfied smile on his face. A gray-robed old man stood behind him. His wrinkled face remained expressionless from start to finish. Outside the brothel, a young man and a young woman leaned against the wall and whispered to each other. When the time comes, there will be official schools in various places. They will be called Emingzu Academy, or Emingzu Hope Academy. Students from poor families will be given a certain amount of subsidies, or they can do some chores in the academy or work part-time. The curriculum must be reasonable, and they must be well-rounded. We don't want to cultivate a bunch of rotten scholars. I will write a detailed report for you when I get back, and you can submit it to the emperor. Li Yi looked at her and reminded, Remember, you are the only one who can do these things. As for how to get the money, I won't tell you until the matter is settled. The education reform in the Jing Kingdom had already begun on a small scale. Li Yi was not worried that these changes would cause opposition. The old emperor already had the ability to judge. The old emperor had wanted to make a move against the aristocratic families for a long time. But the inside story was not that simple. Li Yi ate with him every day, and he learned a lot from him in other aspects. The fact that the court was controlled by the aristocratic families had always been a thorn in the old emperor's heart. He wanted to use the children from poor families to cultivate officials who were absolutely loyal to the royal family to achieve his goal of centralizing power. Although the emperor had great power, he could not do whatever he wanted. He would be a fatuous emperor if he dismissed an official without a good reason, and he would not be able to convince the public. A family like the Cui family was far inferior to the imperial family in terms of military strength. However, it was impossible for the old emperor to send troops to destroy them just because he didn't like them. That was the behavior of bandits. The influence of the great clans was too great, especially to the officials who were attached to them. Touching them without a reason was tantamount to committing a crime. However, he couldn't just watch as these people stirred up trouble in the court and formed cliques for personal gain. The Cui family was a perfect example. Li Yi felt that the king of Shu, the eldest son of the royal family, was banished to that place because the old emperor couldn't stand the sight of the Cui family. The ones he had always wanted to deal with were the magnates led by the Cui family. Thinking about it, the Cui family had also committed a sin. They had just lost a few million taels of silver, and the coffin itself had probably been used up. Furthermore, the emperor was always thinking about them. What an unlucky year. After listening to him, Emingzu nodded and suddenly asked, "Why does it have to be me?" Li Yi pursed his lips. This is a great contribution. Of course, we should not let the goodies flow to outsiders. So I'm not an outsider? We are the three heroes of the capital. We share blessings and misfortunes. Of course, we think of you first when there's something good. It's too distant to call us outsiders. At least we can be considered as half an insider, right? Emingzu glared at him. Bah, who's your insider? It was obviously a very pure meaning, but she had to misunderstand. Li Yi couldn't be bothered to explain. He only felt that the princess was not straightforward at all today. She was wishy-washy and like a woman. Something's still not right. Emingzu crossed her arms and stared straight at him. Every time you're so attentive, something bad must be going on. When you speak, feel your conscience. Li Yi looked at her and frowned. Ask yourself, when have I ever harmed you? When Li Yi opened his mouth, he naturally looked in the direction of her conscience. Feeling his gaze, Emingzu thought of the bowl of soup she had just drunk. She felt uncomfortable all over. She put her hands down from her chest, but she didn't know where to put them. Finally, she looked at him in embarrassment and walked towards the brothel. How can one pacify the world if one's chest is not clear? Li Yi shook his head. He felt that there must be a deeper meaning behind heaven's arrangement. At the very least, the eldest princess had taken the first step on the road to pacify the world. The old emperor had a lot of fun today. Li Yi could see that the smile on his face had never stopped. In this half a day, he was not the high and mighty ruler of a country, but just an ordinary father. He would let Yongning ride on his neck to watch the circus. He would also beam with joy when the Tsundra Lolita fed him a milk candy. He would walk on the streets for 4 hours, but he was still full of energy. When it was time for lunch, he even let Changda serve him 3 bowls of food. He didn't look like a seriously ill person at all. He could eat and walk, and he was in a good state. Of course, the most important reason was that the food he cooked was delicious. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, he was still lying on Li Yi's rocking chair. He squinted his eyes and swayed back and forth. The eldest princess was massaging his shoulders from behind. Emperor Jing's face showed a satisfied expression. I finally know why you would rather be idle at home than to enter the court and become an official. If you can be so comfortable every day, I wouldn't exchange it for a god. Li Yi tried hard not to show a contemptuous expression. He hadn't done anything yet, but his days were already comfortable. As the dignified ruler of a country, how could he act like a bumpkin who had never seen the world? No matter what, he should at least have afternoon tea and a few pieces of osmanthus cake to relieve his boredom. Emperor Jing closed his eyes and said faintly, "You're the one behind the Cui family's matter, right?" There was nothing to hide. The old emperor knew that the largest glass mine in the Jing kingdom was under his house. He couldn't hide it even if he wanted to. Your Majesty, don't worry. The taxes that should be paid will not be less. It was a good habit to pay taxes. It was also a hush money. The old emperor had been unhappy with the Cui family for a long time. Since he could vent his anger and get money, he certainly wouldn't have any objection. It's getting late. It's time to go back to the palace. Emperor Jing opened his eyes and stood up from the rocking chair. He didn't mention this matter until he left with Yongning and Shaoning. When the eldest princess left, she looked back at him. Li Yi knew what it meant. Sometimes, he really hoped that she was a man. In this way, a lot of unnecessary trouble could be avoided. But when he thought that she was really a man, he felt a little disappointed. A long time ago, he already had a plan and was carrying it out step by step. However, the road ahead was difficult and dangerous. It had not really manifested until now. Moreover, even if he overcome all the difficulties and obstacles and achieved the result he expected, was that result really what she wanted? In fact, Li Yi's heart was still a little confused. She has already left. Why are you still looking? A faint voice came from the side. Li Yi turned around and saw Mississippi Lu holding her sword and leaning against the moon door. Who won just now? When Li Yi was cooking, the old emperor and the two little girls were playing in the front yard. Mississippi Lu and the eldest princess went to the backyard. When she came out alone, her clothes were a little messy. Not surprisingly, they should have sparred for a while. After all, among the people of the same age, only the two of them could be each other's opponents. Mississippi Lu didn't answer, which meant that she didn't win. It seemed to be the same result last time. For Mississippi Lu, who had always swept away her peers, it might be a little hard to accept that she couldn't win against another girl of the same age. Especially in a situation where she couldn't win in terms of appearance and strength. Girls of this age like to compete in everything. Li Yi could understand. He looked at her and comforted her. Don't be discouraged. At least, you are older than her. Mississippi Lu looked up at him with a trace of doubt in her eyes. What did you say? I said, you seem to be a few days older than her? Li Yi looked at her and smiled. I made soup. Do you want to drink some? Chapter 760. Recently, Li Yi was keen on making soup. This work was not as simple as putting a bunch of ingredients in water to boil. The proportion of various ingredients, the amount of water, the heat, the time, and changing any of the parameters, the taste might change qualitatively. In this aspect, he was already very experienced. Of course, the love poured into the soup could not be described by the amount. Rui's soup nourished the fetus, and Xiaofan's soup was beneficial to the growth of puberty girls. Although Mississippi Lu did not need to grow any more, it was not bad to drink more. The one who needed to grow the most was actually the eldest princess, more than Xiaofan. Therefore, when Li Yi entered the palace, he brought her a full cup. Eating egg fried rice with a delicious soup that could nourish one's body would be better. Eating egg fried rice with wine didn't sound like a good thing. How is it? This soup tastes good, right? Egg fried rice was a little greasy, and this soup could relieve the greasy feeling. More importantly, it could also grow the body. Emingzu nodded. Soup with rice was indeed better, but after experiencing something, whenever soup was mentioned, she would think of something that made people blush. She looked at Li Yi with some vigilance and asked, "This soup, what's the use?" To relieve greasy feeling, it's not good to drink all the time. Li Yi looked at her and said indifferently, "Don't worry, it's not poisonous." As he spoke, he poured himself a bowl and started to drink by himself. Mingzhu's doubts disappeared, but she felt a little guilty. She really should not have doubted him just now. Li Yi took out a piece of paper and said, "This is for you." Li Mingzhu took it and looked at it. She found that what was written on it was exactly what he had told her yesterday. It was just that it was more organized and clear. As for the more specific and detailed things, he had deliberately omitted them. Just hand it over like this. Li Yi was worried that she would blurt out all the details on her own, so he reminded her of something else. Emingzu did not ask much. She knew that he did this for a reason. This matter was beneficial to the country and the people. He would not harm her. Emingzu looked at him and asked, "How do you get the money?" "It's a secret for now." Li Yi didn't tell her directly, not because he didn't trust her, but because he trusted her too much. This silly girl's kung fu was quite powerful, but her mind was actually very simple. She could not hide anything in her heart. If he really solved all the problems and then revealed everything, what would they have to do with it? "I'm leaving. I'll come find you in a few days." Li Yi waved his hand and leisurely walked out of the morning dew hall. "County Marquis Li treats His Highness very well," the figure standing behind Emingzu suddenly said when he saw Li Yi walk out. What she meant was not limited to him bringing the princess's favorite food every time he came. In fact, the things he did for the princess were much more than that. He made a princess, a woman, step by step become an existence that even the men in the court could not underestimate. No one dared to question why the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom was still not married, and no one questioned why she could become the dean of the women's college. She led a group of noble ladies in the capital and did many things that men could not do. She also let those people know what it meant to be a woman not inferior to a man. Emingzu did not directly respond. She looked out of the hall and finished the egg-fried rice. After drinking a bowl of soup, she put down the jade spoon and said, "There is still some soup left. I can't drink it. Nanny, drink it. Don't waste it." The old woman smiled. She knew that Emingzu did not want to waste County Marquis Li's kindness. She took a bowl and scooped out the last bowl of soup. After drinking a mouthful, she smacked her lips. Her expression suddenly froze. Before the princess was born, she had always been by the empress's side. She had personally served the empress for more than 10 years and watched the empress grow from a little girl to a woman. Naturally, she knew what this familiar taste of the soup had. Emingzu looked at her with some confusion and asked, "What's wrong?" The old woman put down the bowl and looked at her meaningfully. She said, "This soup is only useful for His Highness to drink. I'd better not drink it." It was late at night. The hall of diligent government was silent. Occasionally, there was the sound of pages turning. Changde walked out of the shadows. He coughed lightly and reminded, "Your Majesty, it's time to rest." "Changde, tell me, am I really old?" Emperor Jing put down a memorial. It was hard to tell whether his expression was gratified or lonely. "Your Majesty is in the prime of your life. Why do you say that?" Changde's voice finally had some emotion. "If Emingzu was a man, why would I do this today?" Emperor Jing seemed to be talking to himself. He picked up the memorial and read it again carefully. Everything was clear and extremely comprehensive. He couldn't help but murmur, "These were all thought of by Emingzu alone? That boy is right. I am indeed old. The future of the Jing kingdom is still in the hands of these young people." At this moment, Changde roughly guessed what he meant. In terms of writing poems and lyrics, His Majesty was not as good as County Earl Li. In terms of martial arts, His Majesty was not as good as the eldest princess. However, His Majesty had always been good at governing the country. When one day, he found that he was not as good as others in these matters, it was not strange for him to sigh like he did just now. Changde thought for a while and said, "Her Royal Highness is also worried about His Majesty." "I'm afraid that County Earl Li also contributed a lot. It's not the first time that he gave all the credit to Emingzu." A trace of anger appeared on Emperor Jing's face. He said, "This brat, if he had taken out these things earlier, I wouldn't have had a headache for so long." As Emperor Jing spoke, he waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Leave this matter to Emingzu. I am also happy to be idle." He was very confident in Mingzhu's ability. Since this matter was proposed by her, he would leave it to her. In this way, he would also be much more relaxed. The most important issue was the funding. The higher-ups only said that there was no need to allocate funds from the national treasury. As for where the huge sum of money would come from, he didn't care so much. Someone would always have a way. As if thinking of something, Emperor Jing suddenly said, "Do you think he has any thoughts about Emingzu?" If Li Yi didn't have a wife, he would even think it was a good thing. But it was impossible for a princess of a country to be a concubine. Her Royal Highness and he have known each other for a long time. He is also indebted to her. Changde thought for a while and said, "As for other things, it shouldn't be." Naturally, he couldn't say much about this kind of thing. With Mingzhu's age, if it was another princess, she would have gotten married long ago. But she always has her own ideas. I don't know her thoughts, so I can't help her decide. If it was someone else it wouldn't matter, but that brat. Emperor Jing frowned. After muttering a few words, he shook his head and showed a relaxed smile on his face. "It's getting late. Let's rest." Although there was still some loneliness in her heart, this was the child's heart. The child had grown up and could finally help her father share some things. "It's done?" Li Yi looked at Emingzu and couldn't help but ask. Emingzu didn't speak but nodded. Although he didn't know why she didn't seem to be in a good mood and the way she looked at him was a little strange, It was always worth being happy that the plan had taken a big step forward. Drink soup, drink soup. Li Yi filled another bowl for her. Emingzu looked at him and there was a trace of shame and anger on her face. She lowered her head slightly. Seeing that she didn't seem to want to drink, Li Yi was stunned. Then he shook his head and didn't care about it. He said, "Forget it, I will bring it back for Xiaofan to drink. The food is still complete. I will also bring this soup bowl back. The next time I come, I will return it." After all, whether the Princess Royal grew up or not had little to do with him. The little servant girl was in the puberty period and her nutrition had to keep up. Seeing him stand up and prepare to leave, Mingzhu's face showed the same color as a peach blossom. She gritted her teeth and said, "Put it down." Chapter 761. The emperor's condition seemed to have improved. The morning court, which had not been held for a long time, reopened today. This was the first time in several months. The officials were in high spirits and did not dare to be negligent. They stood in front of the palace gates before dawn, waiting. The morning court had not been held for a long time. Originally, they thought that there would be a lot of important matters accumulated. They did not know when it would end today. However, in less than an hour, all the officials lined up and walked out of the political hall. The emperor's body might not be able to hold on. Even in the past, it was rare to end a meeting so early. 2 provinces had been hit by floods half a month ago. The losses were not small. The emperor ordered the Ministry of Revenue to allocate silver as soon as possible for disaster relief. He also sent officials from the Imperial Water Surveillance to deal with the floods. This should be the most urgent matter. However, similar disasters were experienced almost every year. There would not be any big mistakes if they were done step by step. After that, it was some trivial matters of the various departments. Since it was the morning court, something had to be said. Otherwise, it would be awkward for everyone to stand there and make it seem like they had no work to do. In addition, he ordered the Ministry of Rights to assist the princess in supervising the construction of the county schools. There was also a small reform of the imperial examinations. It was something that everyone was concerned about. Although he had failed many times, the emperor did not seem to have given up on the suppression of some powerful families. There was still a long distance from the political hall to the yamen of the various departments. The officials gathered in 2s and 3s and discussed the matters of the morning court. Daxing County School. His Majesty is opening the door to the poor again. Didn't they do this a few years ago? In the end, it was still left unsettled. It's difficult. If we want to build more academies for the provinces, we need to hire more teachers, ink, paper, and books. We haven't even counted the academies. All of this requires silver. Can the national treasury take out that much? Who knows? The emperor didn't say that it would be from the national treasury. He only said that the eldest princess would be in charge of this matter. Can the eldest princess take out so much silver? If it was a year or half a year ago, the focus of their debate would be that although the princess was of noble status, she was only a woman. What right did she have to participate in national affairs? However, at this moment, no one dared to say this. The last person who had questioned her had his spine broken by the people of the capital. A great scholar of a generation ended up being disgraced and his reputation destroyed. Countless people would sigh when they thought of it. In this year, the eldest princess's brilliance was too dazzling. She had brought back Tian Fa and helped the Jing kingdom defeat the Qi kingdom. Even now, the Jing kingdom was still deeply intimidated. Later on, she had defeated the envoy of the Qi kingdom and saved the face of the country. Later on, the Women's Union and the Women's Academy had even promoted the national policy of not marrying before the age of 16. They had trained female midwives, which reduced the chances of a woman dying from dystocia by several times. All of these things were enough to convinced. Up until now, they wouldn't be surprised if the eldest princess's shadow appeared in court affairs. But as for whether she could handle this matter well, no one had any expectations in their hearts. After all, even His Majesty had encountered irresistible obstacles in this matter, let alone the eldest princess, a woman. Not to mention other obstacles, just the amount of silver needed was not a small amount. If she couldn't solve this problem, it would be a joke. Perhaps it was because they saw through this that the officials with deep backgrounds didn't show any displeased expression. Supporting the poor was naturally suppressing the influential families. His Majesty's display of this intention showed that he was dissatisfied with them. The big families, who had always been close to the royal family, were not afraid. Their status in the court was guaranteed by the royal family. But for the Cui family and other families, things were not so simple. At least in the current court, they were not so stable. An official said in a low voice, "These years, the court has changed a lot. Is His Majesty still not satisfied?" "Don't worry. Haven't we already experienced such things?" A middle-aged man next to him showed a disdainful smile and said, "This time, there will be no end. Even His Majesty can't do it." Eldest princess. Haha. Yeah, the most important thing is where the silver comes from. One person nodded and said, "If it's only in the capital, it won't affect the overall situation. But if it covers all the provinces, I'm afraid the national treasury won't be able to afford it. I'd like to see what eldest princess plans to use to fill this bottomless pit." Haha, Her Royal Highness's business is doing well, but this time, the shining silver is destined to go down the drain. As soon as one person said this, he was pulled by the arm by the person next to him. The person's gaze was extremely obscure. That person looked back and saw the gloomy face of one of the important figures of the Cui family. His heart immediately thumped and he thought, "This is bad." Wasn't mentioning this in front of the Cui family rubbing salt in their wounds? Everyone knew that the Cui family had suffered heavy losses because of the glass incident. The exhibition was not held and the glass they had hoarded was smashed to pieces in front of everyone. According to insiders, this time the Cui family would probably lose millions of taels of silver. In terms of losses, who could compete with the Cui family? Not daring to look at that official Cui again, he looked back at the eldest princess who had just walked out. A strange look appeared in his eyes and he quickly walked forward. "It seems that no one is optimistic about you." Li Yi rarely attended court today. He walked beside Emingzu. With his current hearing ability, it was not difficult for him to hear what the people in front of him were talking about. For the eldest princess, it was even less difficult. "Just watch." Emingzu looked back at him and said lightly. Li Yi heard this and was stunned. He didn't know whether he should be touched or helpless. This matter had been arranged in front of hundreds of officials. There was no way back. The silver had not been settled yet, but she was actually not anxious at all. She didn't think, what if he was bragging? However, the feeling of being trusted was not bad. Li Yi looked back at her and comforted her. "Don't worry. If you don't have money, you can cheat some more." "What did you say?" Emingzu looked back at him. "I said if you don't have money, you can earn some more." Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile, "You also know that I am very good at making money. This little money is just for sprinkling water." There seemed to be someone waiting in front. When he saw the two coming, he bowed slightly and said, "Your Highness." Then he looked at Li Yi and nodded slightly. Li Yi also smiled back. The head of the Wang family was an old friend who had friendly cooperation with him. Emingzu looked at him and asked, "May I know what's the matter, Official Wang?" The relationship between the Wang family and the royal family had always been close. Although she was a princess, she would not be too arrogant in front of the head of the Wang family. "Your Highness wants to build the county school. It is a good thing for the country and the people. The Wang family is willing to donate 100,000 taels of silver to contribute to this matter." 100,000 taels of silver was not a small amount. When Li Yi gave it to Mississippi Liu, he hesitated for a moment. The Wang family actually took it out so easily. They were indeed the wealthiest family in the Jing kingdom. They were full of confidence. However, thinking of how much they had earned these days, it was normal for them to take out some money to show their love. Emingzu was also stunned when she heard this. Then she said with a smile, "I appreciate the Wang family's kindness. However, I have already made arrangements for this matter. There is no need for official Wang to worry." She knew that Li Yi did not want others to interfere in this matter. Moreover, he had just said that the money was just a sprinkle of water to him. Sprinkle of water should mean that it was not worth mentioning, right? The head of the Wang family was only surprised for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "In that case, I will leave first." Li Yi turned his head and looked at her in a daze. His face was full of disbelief. Being stared at by him and thinking of the effects of the soup, Emingzu felt that a certain part of her body was a little strange. This feeling was unprecedented. She blushed and asked, "Why are you looking at me?" Li Yi touched his forehead with one hand, and reached out with the other to touch hers. She did not have a fever. Could it be that after drinking too much of that soup, a certain part of her body would grow and her intelligence would decrease? What are you doing? Emingzu swatted his hand away and said angrily. Li Yi had no time to admire the eldest princess's rare angry look. He took off and chased after the head of the Wang family. Official Wang, wait, don't go. Let's discuss what happened just now. Old Wang, stop. Chapter 762. Lose. You, why are you so? Li Yi bade farewell to the master of the Wang family. When he walked back, he looked at Emingzu and said with disappointment, 200,000 taels of silver, how many academies can be built, how many pens and papers can be bought, and how many teachers can be hired? How can you just reject it like that? In the end, he did not say the word wastrel. After all, she was not Mississippi Lu, and it was not her family that was going to lose. But strictly speaking, this matter was jointly proposed by the two of them. It was the crystallization of their love, and it was their child. As a father, he had the right to fight for more and better benefits for his child. What did you say to Lord Wang just now? Emingzu looked at him and asked in confusion. When the master of the Wang family left just now, his face was full of smiles, and he was obviously in a good mood. She could not think of a reason that could make the person who gave out 100,000 taels of silver so happy. Then, she realized another problem. Looking at Li Yi, she asked uncertainly, you just said 200,000 taels of silver? The Wang family has already agreed to donate 200,000 taels of silver. Li Yi waved his hand and said, but don't make this matter known for now. Doesn't His Majesty want the Ministry of Rights to help you? Let them first. Will this work? Emingzu looked at him and asked with a frown. If this was the method he was talking about, then this matter would probably encounter unimaginable resistance. Of course not. Li Yi looked at her and said, do you think others are as stupid as the Wang family? Why should they give us money for nothing? I have already made a list for you. When the time comes, let the officials of the Ministry of Rights visit them one by one. They will definitely not donate money. But you don't have to be angry. This is all in our plan. If you want to hear it, I will tell you now. Emingzu waved her hand and said, next time. I have to accompany my mother later. I will leave first. Li Yi had originally planned to tell her all the plans. Hearing this, he was slightly startled and looked at her in surprise. Shouldn't she be eager to know all the plans? When did she become so unmotivated? She could help him once or twice, or even 8 or 10 times, but she couldn't help him forever. This is such an important matter, can't you show a little bit of enthusiasm? The sound of her footsteps gradually faded away. Li Yi shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He shouted at her back. The soup I brought for you is in the cafeteria. Don't forget to get it. With that, he walked towards the palace gate. Mingzhu's body trembled and she stopped in her tracks. An unnatural blush appeared on her face. Originally, he wanted to spend a few days in peace in the future and not care about the matters in the court. But sometimes, he couldn't stay idle. Fortunately, he was only helping the eldest princess with these things. He just gave her some ideas, and the rest was up to her. Li Yi's skill in making soup had improved by leaps and bounds. He would change it every day. Yesterday, he had heard Xiaofan and Rui say that her chest had been warm recently. Was she sick? She was too embarrassed to tell him these words. Li Yi could only tactfully tell her through Rui that it was normal for a girl to feel this way when she was growing. Xiaofan was almost 17. In another 2 years, the little servant girl would become the senior servant girl. Of course, making soup was just a hobby for a while. What he liked to do the most was to sit in front of Rui after giving her a massage. He would put his ear on her lower abdomen and the two of them would talk about the private matters between husband and wife, including what name the child should be named and how to educate them. Of course, there was one point that the two of them tacitly agreed on. Whether it was a boy or a girl, they had to be skilled in both the pen and the sword. They didn't have to worry about this because they had a father who was skilled in both the pen and the sword. But if they wanted to learn martial arts, Rui would be reluctant to be too strict with them. If they wanted to succeed, they needed Mississippi Lu. But if she was too strict, it might scare the child. No, he had to think about it carefully. Many officials from the Ministry of Rights visited the officials and nobles in the capital one by one. They hoped that they could contribute to the development of education in the Jing Kingdom. They wanted to donate some money to build more academies so that the children who couldn't afford to study could have a chance to change their fate. The officials from the Ministry of Rights visited them personally. Out of understanding, they couldn't let them return empty-handed. Therefore they really donated some silver. 100 taels, 200 taels, and 300 taels were considered too much. A minister only donated 50 taels. It was said that a minister counselor of the Ministry of Rights walked around the Cui family and didn't even drink a cup of tea. It couldn't be said that they were stingy. After all, after the last audit, all the officials more or less donated money to the national treasury. Some even donated their family's wealth. It hadn't been that long. They couldn't ask the officials and nobles to donate money every time the court lacked money. After all, this wasn't a long-term plan. Even if they didn't donate money, they had a valid reason that everyone could understand. Moreover, the emperor supported the poor. It was a terrible idea to ask the people from the Ministry of Rights to go to the rich families or the families of the officials related to them to raise money. Even if they had money, they wouldn't donate it. Her Royal Highness was only a woman after all. They thought she would have some brilliant plan, but according to the current situation, this matter was nothing more than a joke in the end. Even the Ministry of Rights had advised the emperor that they didn't want to participate in this matter anymore. Not only were they unpopular, they couldn't raise money, so it would be futile. They were usually very busy with work and didn't need to waste time on these things. Zhang Shichen sat on the stone bench and held a cup of hot tea in his hand. He slowly said, "Although the eldest princess is powerful, she is still a woman. How can she easily solve something that even the emperor can't do?" Now, his treatment here had changed from herbal tea to hot tea. This was a great improvement for him. Although the woman across from him still didn't want to talk to him and it was almost all him talking alone, after the court session, being able to sit here and talk for a while, even if it was just talking to himself, talking about some things in the court or old events, even if he didn't get any response, it was enough to calm his heart. Sang Zumo's eyelashes fluttered and she suddenly said, "Her Royal Highness is an extraordinary woman. Maybe she really has a way." Her tone inevitably had a different meaning. Even if Her Royal Highness had no way, there would be someone who would help her find a way and help her solve all the problems properly and perfectly. There was no doubt about this. Because he was always like that. Ahem, ahem. The sudden voice startled Zhang Shichen, and he almost choked on the tea in his mouth. He raised his head in disbelief. This was the first time she had taken the initiative to talk to him for so many days. He wiped the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. After coming back to his senses, he hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, Her Royal Highness has created many miracles. Maybe this time, everyone will be impressed." In 3 days, she raised 2,000 taels. Emperor Jing rubbed his eyebrows and looked down. He said, "The Ministry of Rights is quite dissatisfied with this. They think this is too absurd. Emingzu, what do you think?" The slender figure standing below thought for a moment and said, "In that case, there is no need to trouble the Ministry of Rights anymore. Father, rest assured, I will think of a way." A curious expression appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Even with the Wang family's 200,000 taels, it is far from enough. What do you think? Tell me. Emingzu looked up at him and said softly, "He didn't say." "Who?" Emperor Jing was stunned for a moment before he seemed to understand something. He waved his hand and said, "Father knows. You can go now." Seeing Emingzu walk out of the door, Emperor Jing sighed and leaned back in his chair. He sighed and said, "I am old. It seems that I am really old." Chongda came out and asked, "Do you want me to bring him here?" "There is no need." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "I don't care what method he uses to get so much money. Anyway, I don't have to worry about it. If things are not done well, be careful of his butt." Emperor Jing looked at the sky and said, "It is not early. It is not easy to rest early. Today, go to concubine Yan's place." Chongda nodded and a smile appeared on his old face. His Majesty had not rested so early for a long time. If that boy took the initiative, many political affairs would not need His Majesty to worry about. Unfortunately, Chongda suddenly looked in the direction of the eldest princess's departure and thought. Chapter 763. There was a heated discussion in the capital these days, and the scope of the discussion was very wide. Even the poor farmers, who usually did not care much about state affairs, often went into the city to inquire about the construction of the academy. They heard that after the academy was built, the children of the poor would be able to study for free. Their children would be 7 years old next year. Would they be able to study in the academy in the future? The farmers, who had eaten the last meal and had to worry about the next, should be most concerned about the problem of food. They had never cared about state affairs, and no matter what the higher-ups did, as long as they could eat their fill and survive in this world, that was the first thing they thought about when they woke up every day. But this time, they had to be concerned. If what the eldest princess was doing was successful, their children would not have to repeat the life of their fathers like them. They could go to the academy to study and be scholars. In the future, if they could become the top scholar and become a high-ranking official, they would bring honor to their ancestors and their families. In their view, scholars were all going to become the top scholar and become a high-ranking official. Although Scholar Wu at the entrance of the village had not become the top scholar, everyone in the village who saw him had to respectfully call him Duke Scholar. In short, no matter what status they had in the past, as long as they studied, everything would be different. This was a joyous occasion. Her Royal Highness had done something good for them again. First, she had summoned her own daughter and allowed her entire family to have a full meal. Now, she had even allowed their sons to study. They did not know how many things the current emperor had done for them, but Her Royal Highness was really speaking up for these poor commoners. Building an academy required money, and Her Royal Highness ran around to raise money for them. However, those rich officials did not seem to be willing, and it seemed that the matter of building an academy could not be carried out. This was the situation that they learned after entering the city. Their money. Isn't it all from the wealth of the people? They really want to do things for the commoners. All of them have become misers. An old farmer held onto his walking stick and kept hitting the ground, his face full of resentment. This is an opportunity for the children. They can't be like us. Someone gritted his teeth and said, "They must study. Only after studying can they have a future." One of them shook his head and sighed. Sigh. They are all cruel and unscrupulous. The one who truly cares about the poor people is still the Princess Royal Highness. A carriage slowly passed by on the street. After all these days, the old man driving the carriage already understood that the wide road was always blocked by traffic. In order to not waste time, they had to take a long detour and take another clear path. Then, he would stop at the entrance of an alley. Sometimes, he would stop for a quarter of an hour, and sometimes, he would stop for as long as an hour. Fong and the sloppy old man sat on either side of the carriage, thinking about what they had just heard on the street. They lifted the curtain and said to Li Yi, "Young master, these officials are so stingy that they won't even pay this little bit of money." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't say that. Other people's money doesn't come from the strong wind, and they don't want to be blown away by the strong wind. It's their freedom to donate or not, and we can't control it. Don't engage in moral coercion." Fong nodded, not fully understanding. Although he didn't know what moral coercion meant, he knew that his silver was picked up from the sand, sent to him by others, and cheated from the Qi Kingdom. It seemed that it was not as convenient as the strong wind, and he didn't want to give it to others for free. Li Yi jumped off the carriage and walked into the alley. The sloppy old man habitually threw a milk candy into his mouth and looked in a certain direction. How long is he going to do this? Soon. Fong took a candy from the sloppy old man's hand and murmured. The sloppy old man glanced at him, put the remaining milk candy back into his arms, and asked, "Soon what?" Fong glanced at him and said, "Soon means soon." These days, when the son-in-law passed by here, the expression on his face was completely different from before. He had carefully observed him for many days, and could naturally see some subtle emotions. The sloppy old man seemed to understand something, and asked, "Say, between your family's young miss and the young lady in here, who do you think he likes more?" Fong looked at him in surprise. He didn't expect this eccentric old man to be so passionate on the inside, to be interested in this kind of thing. There's no comparison. Fong shook his head and said, "The son-in-law likes the young miss because the young miss is the young miss, and not someone else. He likes Miss Zheng because he likes her." "What do you mean?" The sloppy old man was stunned for a moment, and after pondering for a while, he still didn't understand. Then, as if he had thought of something, he looked at him with some mockery. "Are you talking about yourself?" Fong glanced at him. "What does that have to do with me? Don't think I don't know that you have a lover in the Jade's courtyard. Why didn't you go look for her today?" Fong's face suddenly changed and he said angrily, "You followed me." The sloppy old man looked at him disdainfully. Who doesn't know about your trivial matters? Trivial matters? Feng actually wasn't angry anymore. Looking at you, I'm afraid you've never been liked by anyone before, right? This sentence seemed to touch on the sloppy old man's reverse scale, and he immediately glared at Feng. What? Why don't you go to the Wu Kingdom and ask around? When this old man was young, he could be considered elegant, and many women fell in love with him. If it weren't for the fact that I was obsessed with martial arts. So you never married in your life? Feng looked at him with a smile. The sloppy old man didn't speak, and narrowed his eyes at him. If it weren't for the fact that he had been cultivating his mind these days, he would have already smacked him with his palm. However, he couldn't casually smack this guy in front of him, so he didn't care about this. The sloppy old man thought for a while, and continued with the previous question, what if your family's second miss is added? Second miss? This question was a bit complicated. Feng was startled, and looked up at the sky, feeling that today's sunlight was a bit dazzling. Li Yi sat at the stone table, took a sip of tea, and asked, the Cui family's ready-made clothing stores are all closed, right? Zheng Zumo looked up at him and nodded slightly. These days, she had also faintly heard some news that the Cui family had lost a lot of money and mortgaged many stores in the capital, including those ready-made clothing stores, which hadn't been opened for a long time. These days, they had also made some adjustments to their strategy. Even if there were more counterfeits, there would be corresponding countermeasures. I heard that the eldest princess encountered some obstacles in building the Silver Academy? Li Yi thought she would ask specifically about the closure of the Cui family's ready-made clothing stores. He didn't know why she suddenly brought it up. He shook his head and said, those are all appearances. Everything is going according to plan. Zheng Zumo looked at him and asked, did you plan it? Of course, I didn't expect them to donate much money. The less they donate, the better. They are laughing at the eldest princess now, but they won't be able to laugh in a few days. After Li Yi finished speaking, he saw that she lowered her head and didn't speak. He thought for a moment and suddenly asked, are you jealous? Hee, Mrs. Jealous. Xiao Cui stood behind and said with a chuckle. Ever since she saw the two of them rolling on the bed that day, she could say some things in front of the two of them. The two of them were on the bed, one on top of the other. According to common sense, during the time she couldn't see, they should be rolling around. Xiao Cui, shut up. Zheng Zumo looked at Xiao Cui angrily, stood up, and hurried to the studio. Li Yi stood up and gently knocked on Xiao Cui's head. How can you talk about your own miss like that? How impudent! Xiao Cui covered her head, feeling wronged. You two just want to find a reason to be in the same room, and you're pretending so well. Li Yi walked into the studio and saw that she was already sitting at the table. He explained, that's really just a facade. If they don't donate now, they will still donate in the future. They even have to beg me to donate. Don't say any more. Zheng Zumo hurriedly raised her head and said, why are you telling me this? If someone else hears it, it will ruin your plan. We're on the same side, what are you afraid of? Li Yi looked at her and said, but these words really can't be told to anyone else, or the consequences will be very serious. You can't tell that Assistant Minister Zhang either. I won't tell him. Zheng Zumo said firmly, then looked up at him and asked, what will the consequences be? Li Yi thought about it and said, I will lose face, and the Princess Royal will also lose face. Many people will laugh at her, and most importantly, we will lose a lot of silver. Zheng Zumo knew the concept of silver to him. If he said a lot of silver, then it really was a lot. Thinking that he was telling such an important thing to her, she couldn't help but feel a trace of warmth in her heart. How is it? I've told you such an important thing. Are you touched? Li Yi walked over and looked at her with a smile. He opened his arms and asked, are you touched enough to want a warm hug? That trace of warmth quickly disappeared. Zheng Zumo grabbed a pillow from the side of the bed and threw it at him. Pervert. She had learned this phrase from Yongning a long time ago. Yongning said that those who liked to take advantage of girls were all perverts. Chapter 764. When Li Yi pushed the door open again and walked out, he habitually held Xiao Cui's head with his hand. He knew that she had the habit of leaning on the door to eavesdrop. If she suddenly lost her support, it was very likely that she would fall to the ground. The girl was, after all, thin-skinned. After being caught again, she looked at Li Yi with some embarrassment. She blushed and said, "Li, are you leaving?" "I'm leaving." Li Yi patted her head and walked out of the courtyard. "Why don't you take your lover back and let her stay in the brothel alone? Do you feel at ease?" Next to the carriage, the sloppy old man was chattering. "Could it be that you are afraid of your wife, as they say?" Fong did not pay attention to the sloppy old man because he was still thinking about the question just now. Although he now boasted that he was a smart person, especially towards the son-in-law, he could see very clearly from the perspective of an outsider. However, the old man's question just now made it difficult for him to answer. Li Yi got on the carriage and said, "Let's go to the palace." Fong sniffed and smelled a faint fragrance. He shook his head and waved his whip. The carriage slowly moved. When Li Yi stepped into the imperial garden, Jingdi was playing chess with the proud Lolita. Maybe it was because there was nothing to be busy with political affairs, but the old emperor was more and more leisurely and elegant recently. The proud Lolita no longer played chess with others. She had already understood that the rules of the chess were set by herself. She was invincible in the palace. Even if Li Yi met her, he would have to retreat. They were playing 5 in a row. Li Yi stood by and watched for a while. He couldn't help but sigh. The proud Lolita's thinking was really quick. It seemed that she had a high talent in all kinds of chess. When Jingdi put a black piece in a position that he thought was suitable, the proud Lolita had already put it down. Then she said with a smile, "Father, you lost again. Today I can go out of the palace to play." Jingdi waved his hand helplessly and said, "Shaoning, you go play first. Father wants to say a few words to the teacher." The arrogant Lolita stood up, winked at Li Yi, and ran away quickly. Emperor Jing pointed to the chessboard in front of him and stretched out his hand. "Let's play." Since he couldn't beat the Tsundra Loli, did he think he couldn't beat him? Emperor Jing was still holding a black chess piece. He placed a chess piece in the center of the chessboard and said, "What are you doing here instead of solving the problem of the academy?" Li Yi didn't bother with pleasantries and went straight to the point. "I would like to ask for 2 paintings from your majesty." "My calligraphy?" A surprised expression appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Although he was not considered a master of calligraphy, he was still the ruler of a country. His calligraphy treasures were not inferior to any other masters in terms of value. He would often give them to some meritorious officials, but this was the first time someone had directly asked him for it. Naturally, he didn't think that Li Yi liked his calligraphy. In the entire Jing kingdom, the number of people who could surpass him in calligraphy could be counted on one hand. The first thought that came to his mind was that Li Yi wanted to sell it for money. "If you win against me, I will give it to you." These days, the only thing that could trouble him was the matter of the academy. However, with Emingzu and Li Yi around, he didn't have to worry about it anymore. He simply played chess to kill time. Compared to the Tsundra Loli, Emperor Jing's level of playing Gamoku was still very high, even though he hadn't been exposed to this form of chess for a long time. With something on his mind, Li Yi naturally couldn't concentrate on playing chess. His level of Gamoku could only be said to be average. Moreover, this was not something that could be achieved by digesting a few chess records. There were also various accidental factors. At this time, he was absent-minded and lost 3 games in a row. When he collected the chess pieces again, Emperor Jing glanced at him and said lightly, "Be more serious. If you can't beat me today, don't even think about the calligraphy." The matter of the academy had almost fermented enough. It was time to move on to the next step of the plan. Li Yi also planned to find the eldest princess after getting his calligraphy. The 2 of them would go out of the palace to do something. Just now, they had already wasted a lot of time. There was no time to play chess with him, especially when he was at a disadvantage after more than half of the chess pieces were gone. He knew that he couldn't go on like this. It was time to show his real skills. So he raised his head and stared at the sky behind Emperor Jing. Emperor Jing looked at the chessboard. Seeing that he didn't move for a long time, he thought that he was thinking. After waiting for a while, seeing that he still hadn't made a move, he raised his head and saw that Li Yi's eyes were staring straight ahead, as if there was something behind him. Emperor Jing looked back and saw that it was empty. He looked at Li Yi and asked doubtfully, "What are you looking at?" "There is a cloud there," Li Yi said. "What about the cloud?" Emperor Jing's voice was even more doubtful. "Cloud? Yes, what about the cloud? Isn't it just a cloud?" Li Yi shook his head and retracted his gaze. The chess piece in his hand finally fell on a certain position on the chessboard. He looked at Emperor Jing with a smile on his face. "Your Majesty, you have lost." Emperor Jing lowered his head and saw that the white chess pieces on the chessboard had already formed a 5-star alignment. He seemed to think of something and looked back at the sky behind him again. The sky was blue. Where did the cloud come from? He looked back at Li Yi and asked, "Where is the cloud you were talking about?" Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked doubtfully, "What cloud?" In the end, the old emperor was willing to concede defeat and gave Li Yi what he wanted. He wanted a few more pieces and sold them when he was short of money in the future. However, the old emperor looked at him with a strange expression. He had to follow the original plan and let him write a few words before running away. Through this matter, he discovered another thing. The old emperor's chess skills were bad and he couldn't afford to lose. Li Yi rubbed the proud Lolita's head and said, "Be good. Today, teacher and your royal sister have something to do and can't play with you. Just stay in the palace." "No, Yongning has been summoned by Her Highness. There is no one to play with me." The proud Lolita hugged Li Yi's arm and said with a sobbing tone, "I am alone in the palace. It is very lonely." Such a young child actually knew about loneliness. Li Yi couldn't refuse no matter what. He could only nod helplessly and said, "Then follow me." The sobbing tone in the Lolita's voice immediately disappeared. An excited expression appeared on her face. "Then let's go find my royal sister now." Li Yi was a little dazed as she led him to the morning dew hall. He only felt that there was no sincerity left in this world. Women who practiced martial arts usually maintained their figures very well. If it was those who were obsessed with martial arts, there was not a single extra thing on their bodies. It was as if they were made by nature. Of course, those who were born with a certain deficiency could not make up for it through practicing martial arts. The flesh on their bodies could be reduced, but it would never be increased. Even though he knew that she had only been drinking the soup for a few days and that it shouldn't have much effect, Li Yi still faintly had an illusion. His gaze subconsciously looked towards a certain part of the eldest princess's body that was dancing with her sword. Women were always particularly sensitive to certain parts of their bodies and could easily feel other people's gazes. The eldest princess who was dancing with her sword suddenly increased in speed. Li Yi reached out and used his middle and index fingers to clamp a long sword. He smiled and said, "Don't mess around." She didn't have any evil intentions. The speed of the sword was not fast and the direction was perfectly straight. Li Yi felt that the scene of him clamping her sword with his hand must be very cool. Teacher is so amazing. The Tsundra Lolita was always so cooperative. Her eyes flashed with little stars and the look of worship made his vanity a little satisfied. Emingzu put away the long sword and looked at him. She asked, "Where is the thing?" "What thing?" Li Yi was stunned for a moment before he remembered something. He said, "That soup needs to be brewed for a long time. I came out in a hurry today and didn't have time to prepare it." "Next time." The Tsundra Lolita shook Li Yi's arm and said in a sweet voice, "Teacher, my royal sister doesn't let me drink the soup you brought for her. Can you bring some for Shawnee in the future?" Li Yi pinched her little face and said, "No, this kind of soup is not for children to drink." Mingzhu's face turned slightly red. He really knew the effects of that soup. So was he disdaining her? She glared at him vaguely. She walked over and opened something he placed on the table. "Father's handwriting?" She couldn't help but exclaim softly when she saw the 4 big words, Emingzu Academy, written on the paper. Li Yi was having a headache on how to explain to the Tsundra Lolita why that kind of soup could only be drunk by older girls and not younger girls. This was a false proposition because it was more effective for a growing girl than an older girl. But he couldn't really explain it like that. Seeing that she picked up the paper, he took the opportunity to walk over and said, "In the future, regardless of whether it's the capital or the other prefectures, the academies established will be called Emingzu Academy. The meaning is that these academies aim to cultivate brilliant talents like Emingzu for the country." The names of the academies were also very particular. It was very appropriate to use Emingzu as a metaphor for talents. It was easy to understand and meaningful. Of course, the reason why Li Yi gave the academy this name was not because of this. He wanted to let the students studying in these academies know that they could get rid of their poor lives and sit in the bright academy. They could have the opportunity to enter the court and bring honor to their ancestors. They could compete fairly with those powerful peers of the same age. These were all given to them by one person. This person was called Emingzu Li. She was the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom. Chapter 765. Emingzu Academy? Emingzu murmured the name. She could not believe that his purpose was as he said. No matter how she looked at it, there seemed to be another meaning behind it. The proud Lolita no longer asked Li Yi why she could not drink her royal sister's soup. She tugged at Li Yi's sleeve and said with a blush, "Sir, build a few Shining academies too. The Ice Condensation Academy is fine too." After thinking for a while, she felt that she could not forget Yongning. She raised her head again and said, "And Yongning Academy. How about it? It sounds nice too." She felt that although her name was not as nice as her royal sister's, it was much nicer than Cheng Yang's. Li Yi touched her head and said, "Okay, I will build another Shining Academy and let you be the dean." Pinky promise. The proud Lolita immediately smiled. Her eyes formed a crescent shape and she stretched out her little finger. She had learned this action from Yongning. Yongning knew a lot of new things that she did not know. When she talked to her teacher, she could not understand most of the time, so she simply copied him. Li Yi helplessly hooked his little finger with hers. Their thumbs touched, and the proud Lolita said happily, "Pinky promised to hang, it won't change for 100 years." Although she did not know why Pinky promise meant hanging, this action meant that they could not go back on their word. Regardless of whether he hung or not, this was what her teacher had promised her. When she grew older, she would be able to have her own academy. She would be the dean, and she would be a little more powerful than Li Han. This would prevent him from showing off in front of her all day long. Emingzu knew that his words had always been powerful. Since he had promised Shining, there would definitely be a Shining Academy in the future. Perhaps by that time, Shining would have already forgotten about this matter. Seeing that they had completed this childish alliance, Emingzu looked at Li Yi and asked calmly, "The Ministry of Rights has made it clear that they will no longer be involved in this matter. We don't even have anyone we can use now. How are we going to get so much money?" She knew that she had encountered great obstacles in raising the money. Whether it was the imperial court or the common people, they were all discussing this matter. Almost no one thought that she could succeed. Everyone was waiting to see her make a fool of herself. Of course, it would be a lie to say that she didn't care about this. It was only because she trusted Li Yi that she asked this crucial question now. Li Yi looked at her and said mysteriously, "Don't worry, the show has just begun." He put away the things he won from the old emperor and explained, "Change your clothes first. We'll leave immediately. We'll talk later." The proud Lolita brandished her sword at the side. The weather these 2 days had been hot and dry. Although he held an ice pack to his chest, the room was still stuffy. The rising and falling cicadas outside were even more annoying. Wave after wave of tiredness came at him. Thump! The moment his eyes closed, his body fell forward. His head knocked against the edge of the table. Immediately, a large bump appeared. He was completely awake. He quickly pressed the ice pack to his forehead and took a sip of tea. He was no longer sleepy. He lowered his head and began to read the official documents. These few days, Jingdo could not be considered peaceful. The people were very angry. If they were not properly appeased, there would probably be a big mess in the future. The cause of the matter was that the eldest princess wanted to build many academies so that more children from poor families could have books to study. However, the funds to build the academies were not enough. There were obstacles in raising funds, so the matter was temporarily put on hold. In this regard, the people of Jingdo were very angry. After all, this was a major event that was beneficial to the people. All the poor families wanted to send their children to study and fight for a glimmer of hope to bring glory to their ancestors. However, most families even had problems eating, so it was impossible for them to cultivate a scholar. Now that there was such an opportunity, how could they give it up? Lu Dayo could understand their desire. After all, he himself was also born of a poor family. His father had sold everything he had to give him the opportunity to study and take the imperial examination. When he became successful and wanted to be filial, his father, who had worked hard all his life, passed away and did not enjoy even a day of happiness with him. This had always been a regret in his heart. Regarding this matter, in his heart, He was also very supportive of the eldest princess. However, there did not seem to be many people in the court who thought the same as him. When he read the official documents and felt sleepy again, a yamen runner came to report that the eldest princess and the Marquis of Chong and County had arrived. County Magistrate Lu's sleepiness was swept away at this moment. He hurriedly stood up, tidied up his official uniform, came to the back hall of the county government, stepped into the room, and cupped one hand in the other before his chest to the two people sitting above. Greetings to the eldest princess and Marquis Li. Chapter 766. Lord Lu, what's wrong? Li Yi looked at the bump on County Magistrate Lu's forehead and asked in surprise. Of course, Lu Dayou couldn't say that he bumped into it when he was dozing off. He smiled awkwardly and said, I accidentally bumped into it. If he bumped into it accidentally, there would be no reason to be embarrassed. When Li Yi was in Qing'an Prefecture, he heard that Lord Lu and his concubine had a lot of fun in the bedroom. He might have hurt himself by playing some new tricks last night. He looked at him strangely and said, Although you're having fun, Lord Lu, you have to be careful. Emingzi looked at them and asked, What are you talking about? County Magistrate Lu was also puzzled, but he didn't continue on this topic. He raised his head and asked, What can I do for your highness and Marquis? Li Yi was not used to his words. He waved his hand and said, We're old friends. You don't have to be so polite, County Magistrate Lu. How could he, Lu Dayou, be friends with the emperor's close officials and the princess? County Magistrate Lu was nervous, but he couldn't help but feel happy. Although the eldest princess was a woman, she wielded more authority than any of the princes. She was also an influential figure in the royal court. As for County Marquis Li, he was able to influence the political situation. To a certain extent, it could be said that he was able to rise from an insignificant county magistrate of Anxi to a magistrate of the capital. Li Yi didn't say much to him. He took a sip of tea and asked directly, How many rich merchants do you know in the capital? Rich merchants? Although he didn't know why Li Yi asked this question, County Magistrate Lu answered honestly, Although I haven't been in the capital for long, I know many famous country gentlemen and rich merchants near the capital. With many years of experience as a county magistrate, Lu Dayou knew clearly that if he wanted to make achievements in his jurisdiction, he had to build a good relationship with the local tyrants first. The capital was different from Anxi County. There were too many local tyrants here, and all of them were pythons. He couldn't get close to those high-ranking officials and nobles, but he had gotten to know quite a few of the smaller tycoons and magnates over the past year. That's easy. Li Yi nodded, looked at County Magistrate Lu and said, There's something I need to ask Lord Lu to do. I'll be very busy these days. County Magistrate Lu smiled and said, It's my honor to work for Marquis and Her Highness. He had been with Li Yi for a long time, so he wouldn't refuse these things. After a while, County Magistrate Lu paced back and forth in the county government office alone, his face full of excitement. If the Marquis and the Princess had any good things, they would always think of him first. If this matter was completed, how great a merit would it be? If this went on, he Li, Princess Yi, Magistrate Dayou, Li, and Emingzi, Li, Yi and asked. Li, Magistrate Yi with his hands. And said Magistrate Li. Yi. Li, Magistrate Dayou. Lu Li Yi. Li Yi put his hands behind his head and said lazily, How can I know if I don't try? Li Yi had no way of explaining this to her. He was also using the experiences of his predecessors to do things. History was always shockingly similar. Many things would not change with the passage of time. Some principles were applicable to the entire universe. Li Emingzi looked at him. What are we going to do now? Go home for dinner. Li Yi stretched himself. Shaoning is also here. Do you want to join us? What happened in the court had always been the focus of the insightful people in the capital. And the establishment of the academy was not limited to these insightful people. Because it was closely related to the common people, more people participated in it. They were always paying attention to the progress of this matter. Among them, there were many powerful people who could get the news from the Ministry of Rights. For example, which officials donated money, how much they donated, who was stingy, and why the officials of the Ministry of Rights were refused at the door and so on. It was very detailed. Of course, there would occasionally be some messy things mixed in with this information. For example, An official from the Ministry of Revenue only donated 100 taels of silver to the academy. His son spent a lot of money on the top girl of a brothel that night. Another deputy director of the Ministry of Works who donated 50 taels of silver married a concubine the day before yesterday. He held a banquet at home. It was said that the food and wine ordered from Drunken Moon restaurant cost 100 taels of silver per table. Even if he only ordered 20 tables, it would still cost more than 1,000 taels of silver. Not to mention the fact that his concubine was a famous courtesan in the capital. The amount of money used to redeem her was clearly marked. The strings of numbers were written there, causing many people to suck in a breath of cold air when they saw it. Another example was a stingy official who refused the people of the Ministry of Rights outside the door. He spent thousands of taels of silver to buy a precious painting and took turns to invite friends to admire it. Thus, people discovered some things. There was money for prostitution, money for taking concubines, money for buying paintings, money for treating people to meals, but no money for donating money to the academy. In this day and age, there was no such thing as moral blackmail. Some people only felt that these officials were a bit rich and heartless. However, they did not violate the law, so others did not have the right to criticize them. However, this kind of knowledgeable people was, after all, a minority. In this world, most people were ordinary people who had not been educated and only had a shallow sense of right and wrong. Rich people only cared about their own pleasures and did not care about the lives of the common people. Officials who did not make decisions for the people deserved to be scolded. Of course, they did not dare to scold them openly. No one knew how much spittle they secretly spat at those rich and powerful families. In a private room of a tea house in the capital, an elegant middle-aged man looked at the man opposite him and said with a smile, "Sir Wu, that concubine of yours is famous in the capital for her skills in bed. Can your body withstand it?" Sir Wei does not need to worry about this matter. The man who was drinking tea glanced at him and said, "Your son is willing to spend 1,000 taels of gold for a prostitute. This kind of demeanor is probably comparable to that of Sir Wei in the past." The elegant middle-aged man waved his hand and said, "I have already taught that unfilial son a lesson. 1,000 taels of silver is a pity. Add another 2,000 taels and you can buy that mountain-dwelling painting of Yen Gong. Don't you think so, Sir Qi?" A man next to him glanced at him and said lightly, "You don't have to be cynical. I am willing to spend 3,000 taels of silver to buy a painting than to donate 30 taels of silver to them. There is no law in the Jing Kingdom that states that I must donate," the elegant middle-aged man sighed and said, "but the people outside don't think so." Because of these things, the reputation of the people present was somewhat affected. As officials, they cherished their reputation very much. They gathered today because of the events that happened in the past 2 days. Humph! Just a bunch of stupid people. Sir Wu snorted and said, "When this matter is over, no one will talk about it anymore. I want to see how long she can hold on without money." Even on such an occasion, he still did not dare to call her name directly. She is still a woman after all. She is going against all the aristocratic families. Even His Majesty. Haha, let's just wait and see. It should be soon. If she can't raise the money, this matter can only be put aside. Let's see how she will explain to His Majesty and the officials. Laughter could be heard from the crowd, and the slightly tense atmosphere finally relaxed. "Tell your master." A street away from the tea house, County Magistrate Lu looked at the inquiring servant and said with a smile, "Tell him that the capital magistrate Lu Daiyou has come to visit." Chapter 767. Mr. Zhao's mansion was located in the northern district of the capital. Although Mr. Zhao's family was rich, some things could not be done with money alone. No matter how rich he was, he could not live in the area where only the real dignitaries could live. This was determined by his identity. Although businessmen were not untouchables, they were still looked down upon by the upper class. They were not allowed to become officials. Just this one rule was enough to completely restrict them in certain aspects. Therefore Mr. Zhao, who was playing chess with a friend, immediately dropped the game and hurried out to greet the county magistrate when he heard that the county magistrate came to visit. Seeing a person walking over from afar, Squire Zhao hurriedly went up to greet him and said with fear and trepidation, "Lord Lu, your presence brings light to my humble abode. I, Zhao, hope that Lord Lu will forgive me for not going out to greet you." It was not the first time that he met Lord Lu. When Lord Lu had just been promoted to the capital magistrate, he had contacted many gentry and rich businessmen. This was probably what every county magistrate would do after taking office. At that time, Mr. Zhao only clinked his cup with him and did not even have the chance to talk to him. Today, County Magistrate Lu came to visit him in person. His purpose was unknown, but it was impossible for him to play chess with him. Mr. Zhao immediately became nervous. County Magistrate Lu smiled and said, "Haha, if Mr. Zhao's mansion can be called a humble abode, then I really don't know how to describe my county government." Mr. Zhao saw that he was smiling and did not seem to be looking for trouble. Mr. Zhao relaxed a little and stretched out his hand. "Lord Lu, please come in." "Come on, serve the tea. Take out my treasured tea." County Magistrate Lu was a tea lover. After taking a sip of the tea, he praised it. Steward Zhao absent-mindedly added a few words. The two of them chatted about tea leaves, daily life, and business affairs. Time passed by unconsciously. Those who didn't know might think that they were close friends. Finally, Mr. Zhao could not help but look at County Magistrate Lu cautiously and asked, "Why did you come to my humble abode?" County Magistrate Lu put down the teacup unhurriedly and asked with a smile, "Do you know that the Imperial Court is going to build an academy?" "I've heard of it." Zhao Yuanwei nodded. This matter had caused quite a stir in the capital recently. He knew that this matter seemed to have something to do with the eldest princess, but he didn't pay too much attention to the specifics. Then, he realized something. He looked at County Magistrate Lu and asked, "Lord Lu, what do you mean?" "To tell you the truth, we've encountered some difficulties in raising funds for the academy." County Magistrate Lu looked at Squire Zhao with a smile and asked, "I wonder if Squire Zhao is willing to be generous and do something for the poor students in the world?" Zhao Yuanwei was taken aback. Poor students? Poor students? What did it have to do with him? Why did he have to be so generous? It turned out that this Lord Lu had come today to ask him to donate money. The Zhao family was indeed rich, but this money did not grow on trees. Why should he donate it? A trace of dissatisfaction flashed in the depths of Zhao Yuanwei's eyes, but he didn't show it. The smile on his face became brighter and he said, "Of course I'm willing. I've always wanted to do something for the country. Zhao Fu, go to the accountant and get 100 taels of silver." 100 taels of silver was not much for him. It wouldn't cost him much, and he could give this Lord Lu an explanation. He didn't refuse at all. It was not a wise choice to offend County Magistrate Lu for a little money. So he simply set the amount so that County Magistrate Lu wouldn't ask again. County Magistrate Lu still had a smile on his face and said, "On behalf of the poor students in the world, I thank Squire Zhao in advance." Zhao Yuanwei nodded repeatedly. "It's my pleasure." The housekeeper of the Zhao family quickly took out 100 taels of silver, and naturally a runner helped to accept it. "I still have something to do, so I'll leave first." County Magistrate Lu and Zhao Yuanwei exchanged some polite words and then stood up to leave. Zhao Yuanwei stood up and said, "See Lord Lu off." Although he lost 100 taels of silver in vain, it was worth it to see this bodhisattva off. If it weren't for the fact that I really can't take out so much silver, I would like to donate more. When they walked to the gate of the mansion, County Magistrate Lu shook his head and said, "Squire Su from the south of the city donated 3,000 taels of silver to a library for the academy. Shopkeeper Zhang from the north of the city donated 1,000 taels of silver to a school. I'm afraid both of them have the opportunity to be listed on the academy stele. I'm very envious." Academy stele. Dare I ask, what is an academy stele? Zhao Yuanwei didn't hear him mention this matter just now, so he asked doubtfully. County Magistrate Lu smiled and explained, "To build so many academies in various places, a large amount of silver is needed. The National Treasury can't take out so much money in a short time, so we can only collect donations from various places. When Squire Su donated to the library, a stele will be erected in front of the library. It will clearly state who donated it, so that the students will remember who gave them books to study and whose kindness they should be indebted to. In front of the school donated by shopkeeper Zhang, there will also be a similar stele. As for the academy stele, it will be erected in front of the entire academy. You will see it before you enter the gate. It is personally written by His Majesty. Anyone who has contributed to the academy can be nominated on the academy stele. The purpose is to let the students remember who gave them everything they have. Unfortunately, the academy stele will only be erected once. After this time, unless one has made an extremely significant contribution to the academy, it will be impossible to be nominated. Hearing this, Zhao Yuanwei stopped in his tracks and stood there in a daze. This Sir Lu didn't mention this to him just now. He, Zhao Ritian, had spent half of his life in business. It was fine if people looked down on him, but he didn't want his children and grandchildren to be like this. He didn't want his children to be unable to hold their heads up high forever, and never be able to walk with their backs straight. Therefore, he didn't mind spending a lot of money to hire the best teachers for his son, buying the best paper and pens. He even hired 4 study companions. Wasn't it all for the sake of his son's future success, to pass the imperial examinations, and for the Zhao family to get rid of the shadow of being a family of merchants? Why did he do all this? Wasn't it for fame? Donating to the school, donating to the library, and carving his name on the stele in front of the academy. That stele was personally written by His Majesty? From today onwards, who would dare to look down on him, Zhao Ritian? Who would dare to be dissatisfied? If you have the ability, why don't you carve your name on the stele and let His Majesty personally write it? That was an academy, after all. Who knew how many people who graduated from there would achieve success and fame in the future, soaring into the sky with a single leap? At that time, perhaps those officials in the imperial court would occasionally remember the familiar name they saw on the academy's monument when they were young and studying. Zhao Ritian. Even if there was only one person who remembered it, it was enough for him and the Zhao family. Not to mention how much those high-ranking officials would remember the kindness of the past. Other than the tombstone, to be able to carve his name on the stele was something that he could brag about for the rest of his life. Just now, County Magistrate Lu said that this opportunity was only available once. If he missed this opportunity, there wouldn't be another one like this. Damn Squire Su. He was indebted to him in the past, but he didn't bring him along for such a good thing. A hint of anger appeared on Zhao Yuanwei's face, but it quickly disappeared. The smile on his face was unprecedentedly bright. He caught up with County Magistrate Lu in a few steps. Seeing that County Magistrate Lu was about to step out of the mansion, he hurriedly said, "Sir, please wait." County Magistrate Lu looked back at him and smiled. "Oh, Squire Zhao, is there anything else?" Chapter 768. About the donation of silver. I suddenly feel that we should do our part in such a good thing for the country and the people. Only by building more academies can more poor students have access to education and cultivate more talents for the country. Yes, that's it. The more Officer Zhao spoke, the more confident he became. In the end, the expression on his face became extremely sincere and proud. "So, I want to donate more silver to the academy. Lord Lu, let's talk about it in detail?" County Magistrate Lu nodded and said with a smile, "I'm very pleased that Officer Zhao has such a kind intention." "Sir, please. Officer Zhao, please." 3,000 taels of silver was not a small amount even for the Zhao family. However, he had worked hard for silver all his life. At this moment, silver itself was not so important to him. When one reached such a position, he would understand that some things couldn't be bought with silver. Some things couldn't be solved with silver. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, he gave another number. It was 30 times more than the 100 taels he had promised. County Magistrate Lu said with a smile, "Officer Zhao, if you are generous, the poor students of the academy will remember you. It's all for the country." Officer Zhao was waiting for this sentence. He couldn't confirm whether what County Magistrate Lu said was true or not, but he thought that County Magistrate Lu wouldn't lie to him. After all, County Magistrate Lu was a high-ranking official and couldn't lie to him. "There's one more thing I need to ask of Officer Zhao," County Magistrate Lu said while looking at him. "Sir, please speak your mind. I'm not familiar with the rich merchants around the capital city. I hope Officer Zhao can visit them. After all, one person's strength is limited. If there are more people as generous as Officer Zhao..." "Of course. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Officer Zhao answered repeatedly with a burst of ecstasy in his heart. The importance of this matter was self-evident. County Magistrate Lu actually entrusted this important task to him. If he could handle this matter well and properly, he would have a say in the county magistrate's office in the future, let alone in the long run. This was something that couldn't be bought with 3,000 taels of silver. No matter how he looked at it, he wouldn't lose money. Of course, at the same time, he thought of another matter. The Zhao family did have some money, But they were not arrogant enough to think that the Zhao family was the wealthiest merchant in the capital. Once everyone gathered and learned the truth, wouldn't they all rush to donate money? At that time, it would be hard to say if his name would still be left on the academy stele. After all, he believed that those people wouldn't reject the opportunity to leave their names behind. Of course, he had just confirmed with County Magistrate Liu that after the funds of an academy were collected, the rest would be used to build other academies. This academy couldn't be named, but there would always be others. But for the sake of safety, he had to be careful. He waved his hand at the housekeeper and said, "Go to the accounts room and withdraw 2,000 taels of silver." When he returned to the chess room again, his friend could not wait any longer. "County Magistrate Liu, what brings you here?" A stout middle-aged man looked at him and asked with great surprise, "When did you know County Magistrate Liu?" Zhao Yuanwei smiled mysteriously and said, "Let's not rush this matter. I have something great to tell you." As expected of Lord Li, County Magistrate Liu walked out of the Zhao mansion, sighed, and murmured, "Brilliant, really brilliant." The 5,000. To be precise, it should be 5,100 taels of silver. It was as easy as blowing off dust. He didn't even need to say anything, and the other party would take the initiative to come to him, as if afraid that he wouldn't accept it. It was even easier than robbing. He knew how cold the officials from the Ministry of Rights were treated when they went to visit each and every one of them. It was really a world of difference. Moreover, after walking out of the Zhao mansion, he thought of a more important thing. It was true that merchants loved their names, but some people seemed to love their names even more. In just a few days, the entire capital city would once again be bustling with noise and excitement. A yamen runner stood behind him and asked, "Lord, where are we going now?" "To the Su mansion." "Which Su mansion?" "Su mansion in the south of the city." An hour later, a fat man with a protruding belly and a face full of fat sent County Magistrate Liu out of the mansion and said with a smile, "Take care, Lord." When he turned his head, his face instantly became gloomy. "Damn, such an important thing, surnamed Zhao actually didn't tell me." Behind County Magistrate Liu, the yamen runner still understood and said with a smile, "Lord, I know. Let's go to shopkeeper Zhang's mansion now." "He, father, you lost again." The proud Lolita jumped up from her seat and shouted happily. If she won 10 games against her father, she could go out of the palace to play once. If she won 20 games against her father, she could also bring Yongning. Therefore, she now played chess with her father every day. She had saved up for many days. She had already decided in her heart that when she had saved 10 days for both of them, she could go out of the palace with Yongning and did not need to come back for 10 days. Emperor Jing touched her head lovingly and said, "Shaning, go play first. Father is a little tired. We will play again in the afternoon." The proud Lolita nodded obediently. Although she also wanted to save enough time to go out of the palace earlier, her father's health was not good. She had grown up and had to be sensible. She could not let her father be tired. Looking at her jumping away, a trace of guilt appeared on Emperor Jing's face. As a father, he still felt a little sorry for using such a method to keep his daughter by his side to play chess with him. The most difficult thing was handed over to Emingzu and Li Yi. There were no important state affairs these days. It was not easy to have a few days of leisure, but his heart was still worried about some things. He put away the chess pieces and asked, "What has Emingzu been doing these days?" "Her Highness has been in the palace." Changda's voice came over. "Apart from practicing every day, there is no. Oh, by the way, Her Highness is still learning to cook." "Cooking?" There was some doubt in Emperor Jing's voice. Emingzu liked to play with knives and swords since she was a child, but it was definitely not a kitchen knife. When did she become interested in these things? "Yes, cooking." Changda nodded and said, "She often asks the catering bureau to send things over to make soup and so on." Emperor Jing was puzzled for a moment and no longer thought about these things. He asked, "What about Li Yi?" "At home, he goes out occasionally, but it is to accompany his wife for a walk." Emperor Jing frowned and murmured, "What are they doing?" He did not set a deadline for this matter, but the voices in the court about this matter were not small. The pressure that fell on them was certainly not light. How could they be so leisurely? After thinking about it, he asked, "Has there been anything strange about the two of them recently?" Changda said, "A few days ago, Her Highness went out of the palace with him to see the capital's governor, Lu Dayou. After that, the two of them did not have any contact with anyone. Emperor Jing was not unfamiliar with the name Lu Dayou. This person had some abilities. His most prominent characteristic was that he could stand in the perspective of ordinary people. He had a keen insight that many ministers in the court did not have. He could often find some problems that ordinary people could not notice. He was a rare talent. Emperor Jing put away all the chess pieces and said, "Find out what Lu Dayou has been doing these days." Chapter 769. The Secret Intelligence Department was the most feared institution among the officials. The 6 ministries and the Prime Minister had no right to order them around. They were directly responsible to the emperor. Everyone knew about the Secret Intelligence Department, but it was still mysterious in the eyes of the officials. No one knew if any of the maids, servants, or even the concubines he had just married last night were spies from the Secret Intelligence Office. Of course, no one knew the specifics. In any case, that was what was being said outside. Everyone talked about the Secret Intelligence Bureau as if it was a miracle, but whether it was the common people or the officials, no one was able to see its true colors. But one thing was certain. It was easy for the Secret Intelligence Department to investigate anything. They could clearly find out whether the bump on Magistrate Lu Dayou's head was hit on the corner of the table when he was dozing off, or when he was having sex with his concubine last night. Not long after Changde left, he came out again with a secret letter. The Secret Intelligence Department sent countless secret letters to the palace every day. They were classified and sorted out, so it was not difficult to find Magistrate Lu Dayou's. Jing Emperor opened the secret letter and read it carefully. If someone in the capital wanted to investigate the whereabouts of the capital magistrate, Lu Dayou, it was not a difficult task. However, if they wanted to investigate in depth what he had done, who he had met, and what he had said, it would be very difficult. Of course, no one would do these things if they had no grievances with him. It would not be a good result if they were found to follow and investigate an official of the imperial court with evil intentions. But this was not a problem for Jing Emperor. Just by reading the beginning, Jing Emperor had already guessed what Lu Dayou had been doing these days. He was doing the same thing as the officials of the Ministry of Rights did before. The difference was that the officials of the Ministry of Rights raised money for officials and nobles who were related to the Cui family. But Lu Dayou raised money for those businessmen. Of course, it did not mean that businessmen were more generous than officials and nobles to be able to raise so much money in a short period of time. It was because they could leave their names on the academy stele and could leave their names in front of a building of the academy if they donated money. The people from the Ministry of Rights didn't say that when they visited those officials and nobles. The merchants had the same name. They wanted to be famous, so they spent a lot of money to build an academy. Which of the officials and nobles did not have the same name? They were more famous than the merchants. Why didn't they donate? Or did they only donate a little? Because they didn't know. That was because they did not know that by donating silver, they could leave their names in the academy and have their names engraved on the tombstone for generations to come. As smart as Jing Di was, he almost instantly figured out the crux of the matter. Some people had been tricked. From the very beginning, Li Yi, or rather Amingzu, had been scheming against them. The other officials and nobles could start to donate after the whole thing was revealed. However, the officials from the Ministry of Rights had visited mostly officials or families related to the great clans. Could they donate again? If he didn't donate, the reputation he had built up over the years would suffer a huge blow. If he were to donate again, the effect would be minimal since he had already done it once. And those great clans relied on nothing more than the reputation they had built up over the years, the prestige they had among the gentry and the common people. Without these, they were worse than a tiger without teeth. If the establishment of an academy so that the children of poor families could study was a nibbling away at those great clans, and it would take decades to see an effect, then the donation this time was the most direct blow to them. Of course, the scope of the attack was not all great clans. The Cui clan and the noble families of the Cui clan, after experiencing a huge loss of money, were about to face a more serious mental blow. This was something he had wanted to do for many years, but he had never done it. Jing Di's expression was not clear whether he was gratified or disappointed. Finally, he just put down the secret letter in his hand and sighed. "I am really old." His somewhat straight back bent down, and he lay comfortably on the bed. For the first time in 20 years, he felt that the burden on his shoulders seemed to be a little lighter. That was because someone had carried something for him. Hearing the even breathing sound coming from the bed, Changda looked out of the hall. A smile flashed across his face, and he slowly retreated into the shadow of the hall. Sir, I want to eat hot pot. The proud Lolita pulled Li Yi's sleeve and kept shaking it. Li Yi patted her head and said, It's such a hot day, why do you want to eat hot pot? Listen to Sir, drink more soup. Since he came back, he rarely cooked those spicy things. Every day, his meals were mainly light, mainly to take care of Rui's health. Making all kinds of light dishes was his recent main direction. After a while, there were two girls shaking his arm, one on each side. Li Yi looked at the proud Lolita, and then looked at Yongning, who was pulled over by her and avoided his eyes because of her guilty conscience. He said helplessly, Okay. I'll let you prepare it. Later, you go to another small house to eat. There were plenty of vegetables in summer. In fact now, no matter what season it was, they could eat fresh vegetables. In order not to let her pester him, he simply let them eat hot pot alone. Emingzu walked over and looked at him. There's morning court tomorrow. I don't think I can hide it for long. It's about time. I don't plan to hide it for long. Li Yi added some seasonings to the soup and closed the lid. Then he asked, The money should be enough to build the academies near the capital, right? Li Mingzhu nodded. The capital could be said to be filled with wealthy merchants. The amount of silver they donated added up to a terrifying figure. According to the plan, it would be more than enough to build a dozen large academies. It would even be enough to keep these academies operating for a long time. Even when General Shui, the family of generals, and other acquaintances came to her. Although they didn't know the inside story, they were willing to donate some money. But she rejected them with the same reason. It was not time to unveil the veil on this matter yet. Of course, although there was already a lot of money, it was still a long way from covering the entire Jing kingdom. But the money would only be used in the capital. Every place would adopt the form of local donations. Presumably, those people would be more willing to let their names spread locally. As long as the precedent was set in the capital, it would be much easier for the other states and prefectures. If they followed this method, it would not be unimaginable for Emingzu academies to spread throughout the Jing kingdom one day. After tomorrow, we should receive more money. The amount will be very large. How to spend it is a problem. This is just the beginning. In the future, the scope will be wider and there will be more money. Li Yi adjusted the fire to a gentle one and said, Also, to do these things, it's impossible to rely on just you or me. If you want to find someone trustworthy, you can find someone from the Women's Union or other places. Ability is important, but you have to ensure absolute loyalty. These shouldn't be a problem for you. Emingzu pondered over his words and nodded slightly. There's one more important thing. Seeing him speak again, Emingzu turned to look at him with a serious gaze. Li Yi opened the lid of the clay pot and scooped some soup. He passed the bowl to her and said, Help me taste this soup. Is it ready? Chapter 770. The high-ranking officials in the capital had been living comfortably these past few days. They had not attended court for a few months and no longer had to wake up in the dark. Sometimes, they did not even have time to eat breakfast before rushing to the palace gates to gather. They had to stand in the hall for 4 hours and their backs were sore. They also had to drag their tired bodies to various departments to handle various chores. Now they could sleep until dawn, drink their morning tea, and slowly make their way to the yamen. If they were the leaders of various departments, as long as they were not seen by the imperial censors, they could relax even more. Of course, if they received news that morning court was to be held, even the laziest of people would have to restrain themselves and obediently stand at the palace gates for an hour to enjoy the morning breeze. Although it was still summer, the sun had not risen yet. Wearing thin clothes, it was still a little cold. Old General Shui stomped his feet and wrapped his clothes tightly around himself. He sighed. These old bones are getting worse and worse. I wonder how many more days I can attend court. Old General Ma walked over and said, We old bones do not have much time left. Luckily those children are not bad. Old Shui, you can rest in peace even after you die. Before the morning court began, when the officials were waiting at the palace gates, they had to line up according to their official rank and department. They were not allowed to walk around casually, nor were they allowed to congregate casually. There would be a special imperial censor to record the officials' behavior and record it as part of their evaluation. A few imperial censors glanced at the elders of the family of generals who were gathered together, then quickly shifted their gazes away. When they caught a glimpse of an official in the crowd who was secretly touching his buttocks, they immediately walked over with dark expressions and said coldly, "Sir, please pay attention to your manners." The official had wanted to quietly adjust his pants but did not expect to be seen by the imperial censor. He could only look at his nose and his heart. After the imperial censor left, he glanced at the few people who were squatting and chatting under a tree not far away. An indescribable bitterness rose in his heart. This time, old General Shui did not engage in a verbal battle with old General Ma. He sighed and said, "What is Her Highness thinking?" The Her Highness he was referring to was naturally the eldest princess. The incident at the academy had caused a commotion. Countless people in court were waiting to see her make a fool of herself, but she seemed to have completely forgotten about it. She had not done anything in the past few days. The family of generals had wanted to help, but she had rejected them. A red-faced old general thought for a moment and said, "Her Highness has always had her own ideas. I believe we will know in court today." Due to their special status, the family of generals maintained a distant relationship with all the princes. However, the eldest princess was different. She was a woman, and even if she was close to the family of generals, it would not attract criticism. Moreover, the family of generals and the princess residence were closely connected in terms of interests. They were bound together for good or ill. Even if they put aside their feelings, they would naturally pay attention to her matters. In recent days, the emperor, who was ill, had almost handed over all the political affairs to the Minister of State to handle. However, every once in a while, he would still hold a morning court session to ensure that he would not be too distant from the political affairs. The flood of the two provinces was still an extremely important matter. How to control the flood, how to properly settle the refugees, and how to rebuild after the disaster were all important matters for the imperial court. There would be news coming from the front lines almost every day. However, the disaster this time was obviously different from the previous years. The original method could not be used, and the situation was not optimistic. After a round of recommendation by the court officials, the emperor reselected officials who were good at controlling the flood. This matter was temporarily put aside. The focus of the debate in the court shifted to another matter. The establishment of the eldest princess's academy could be said to be closely affecting the hearts of many courtiers. Regardless of their intentions, there was no doubt that countless people were concerned about the progress of this matter. Emperor Jing looked down and said faintly, "Lu Daiyou, tell me, how is the establishment of the academy going?" This caused many people in the court to be slightly stunned. The name Lu Daiyou was unfamiliar to them. Although there were many officials in the imperial court and it was impossible for them to know all of them, it was not to the extent that they had never heard of their names. This could only be blamed on the position of the magistrate of the capital city. It was not big, but it was not small either. In the local area, it was already the head of a county. In the capital city, it was wandering on the edge of the court. It was not even qualified to be noticed by some people. Of course, what surprised them was not this unfamiliar official, but the establishment of the academy. It was clearly the eldest princess who had undertaken the task. Where did this Lu Daiyou come from? Seeing a person coming out from the back, many people were already thinking about something. However, some people still faintly revealed expressions of ridicule and disdain on their faces. From their point of view, this kind of matter was simply impossible. This was because the establishment of the academy would not only involve the capital, but also the entire Jing kingdom. Even the national treasury would not be able to take out so much silver. Lu Daiyou stepped forward and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, so far, a total of more than 500,000 taels of silver has been raised. 13 academies in the capital city are already under construction. 500,000 taels of silver." This number still made many people's hearts skip a beat. This was not a small number. Everyone knew that when the Ministry of Rights raised money, they hit a wall at every turn. Not to mention 500,000 taels of silver, they could not even raise 5,000 taels of silver. In just a few days, where did this 500,000 taels of silver come from? They heard clearly that Lu Daiyou said, "raise money," which meant that this money was not allocated by the national treasury. Where did they raise it from? Their doubts did not last long. Lu Daiyou had already continued. Most of these 500,000 taels of silver were donated by the merchants in the capital city. I have already followed your Majesty's instructions and ordered people to build a stone tablet. Once the academy is built, the stone tablet with the names of the donors will be erected in front of the academy, so that the students and the people will remember their contributions to the academy. As Lu Dayou spoke slowly, the expressions of many officials in the imperial court changed from confusion and astonishment to shock and fear. How could such a thing happen? Those people were only lowly merchants. What right did they have to carve their names on the tablet for the students and the people to revere and pass down from generation to generation? And after today, what would the people of the world think of them? Even merchants knew to contribute to the country. How could they, the aristocratic families that had been passed down from generation to generation, not know? One had to know that, unlike the ordinary officials in the imperial court, the reputation of their families had been accumulated bit by bit. They loved the people and were kind and charitable. They had accumulated bit by bit over decades. With that stone tablet erected in front of the academy, the reputation and fame that they had painstakingly accumulated was all gone. Bah, what aristocratic families! They were not even as good as merchants. How would they have the face to call themselves aristocratic families in the future? In particular, the true aristocratic families were able to stand for hundreds of years without falling. They relied on the terrifying reputation that they had accumulated over a long period of time. If even their reputation was gone, and they had even abandoned the trust of the people and the aristocratic families, no matter how large a family was, it would still be at the end of its road. This simple stone tablet had left these aristocratic families with no other choice. Donate, they had to donate. Lost money could be earned again, but lost reputation was irreversible. Of course, some people's choices were very simple, while others were more difficult. For example, the officials of the Ministry of Rights had visited. If they didn't donate, they would definitely be reviled by the people. If the merchants donated, the other aristocratic families would also donate, which would expose them. In the future, would they still have a foothold in the capital city and the Jing Kingdom? Donate. How much should they donate? They had previously donated dozens or hundreds of taels of silver, and even had a very unpleasant relationship with the officials of the Ministry of Rights. If they went up to donate again with a straight face, how would they have any face left? Even if they donated, they wouldn't have much face left. It was obviously a remedial measure, which would make people despise them even more. So here came the problem. Should they donate or not? At this moment, they had never hated the officials of the Ministry of Rights so much. Chapter 771. At this moment, many people from the Ministry of Rights were in the court. Feeling the resentful gazes around them, they groaned inwardly and felt extremely wronged. They were the ones who did it, but they were also following orders. The fundraising was ordered by the eldest princess, and the withdrawal was ordered by imperial concubine Cui. If they could persist until the end, it would be fine. Even if they would offend so many people, offending a few people was nothing compared to the huge credit they would get for helping the establishment of the academy. However, the problem was that they gave up halfway. He had offended so many officials and clans for no good reason, and all the credit had been snatched away by that Lu Dayou. He had really suffered a great loss on this errand. If they had known that the eldest princess and His Majesty had such a plan, they would not have pulled themselves out of this matter. Perhaps, this method was only thought of by the princess after they left? It was also possible that the princess already had this plan and wanted them to withdraw voluntarily. How could it be? They had no grudges against the princess. Her Highness did not have to deal with them like this. At this moment, there was nothing but depression in their hearts. The morning court session ended very early. As soon as Lu Dayou walked out of the hall, he was surrounded by numerous people. Lord Lu, please wait, please wait. Your Excellency Lu, I am also willing to contribute to the Academy's fundraising. Lord Lu, I wonder if you have time today. How about we talk about the Academy's fundraising in detail? Lu Dayou finally enjoyed the feeling of being surrounded by stars. Even after being promoted to the capital commander, he did not expect that there would be so many high-ranking officials of the imperial court surrounding him with smiles. He could not help but feel a little smug. However, he knew that this was not the time to be complacent. He calmed down and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, everyone. This is not the place to talk. If you want to donate, please send someone to the government office to register as soon as possible." Old General Shui stood at the door of the hall and looked at Lu Daiyou, who was surrounded by people. He stroked his beard and said, "Your Highness's method is brilliant, really brilliant. Why didn't I think that there would be such a marvelous technique?" Old General Ma sighed and said, "It was originally a matter of asking for help, but it has been completely reversed. Countless people are fighting to donate money. This method is not only suitable for the capital, it is applicable everywhere. Even the local academies can be built using this method. The world is full of people who cherish their names. Wonderful, wonderful." The eldest princess had a special identity. Naturally, it was impossible for her to be surrounded by people like Lu Daiyou. The students supported by the scholarship were definitely people of outstanding talent. Since they accepted the Wang family support, they would definitely owe the Wang family a favor and could be considered half a student of the Wang family. And such people of outstanding talent would also have a very high chance of becoming outstanding in the future. Not everyone was expected to repay the Wang family, but after all, they would have an unbreakable connection with the Wang family. In just an instant, Wang Yong weighed the pros and cons in his mind. The conclusion he came to was that there were only pros and no cons. He raised his head to look at Li Yi and said sincerely, "Those 200,000 taels were donated by the Wang family to build the academy. How can I take money from them? How about this? I'll go back and ask for instructions. Every year, a sum of money will be used to set up the Wang family scholarship, which will be used to support students with excellent character and scholarship." Li Yi did not mind this at all. The money would eventually be used on those students. The Wang family were not fools. They definitely understood what Wang Yong understood. He was only pointing it out. When the time came, they could discuss it with the eldest princess themselves. "I'll take my leave first." Wang Yong was in a hurry to report to the family. Li Yi did not stay any longer. From now on, he did not need to interfere in this matter anymore. Education was a century-long project. It would take a long time to show its effects. But now that the foundation was stable, there would be fewer obstacles in the future. He had written down everything about the academy in great detail on a piece of paper. Her Highness just had to follow the prescribed order. Of course, she still had to control some of the details herself. Li Yi did not want to arrange everything for her. She was able to handle the women's union, various businesses, and the affairs of the women's college so perfectly. It was enough to show her ability. There would be more things she had to decide and deal with in the future. She could not become dependent. Li Yi needed to extinguish the seeds that had just arisen as soon as possible. Li Yi stared blankly in a certain direction. When he made this happen, he actually did not feel much of a sense of achievement. Instead, he was a little hesitant. This was after all his wishful thinking. He could not tell anyone, including her. But no one knew better than him how difficult and long this path would be. Whether it could be replicated was still unknown. If things did not develop in the direction he had planned, it would be more harmful than beneficial for her to have such power and resources in her hands. Most importantly, before the old emperor passed away, he did not think he could help her reach that step. That day would come sooner or later. Who would be the new emperor? What would her future be like? Yongning, Shaoning. If that day really came, he would definitely take Yongning away. The proud Lolita was also worried. The palace was not a place she should stay. She would be unhappy for the rest of her life. As for the eldest princess, she would not leave. What should he do? Rob her? But he could not defeat her. What a headache. What are you thinking about? A familiar voice came from the front. Li Yi looked up and saw Mingzhu walking in. He pointed to the opposite side and said, "Sit." Li Mingzhu sat down opposite him and thought of the way he looked at her just now. In that instant, his gaze seemed to contain something very strong, something that she could not describe with words. Her heart was slightly flustered. "What were you thinking about?" she asked subconsciously. "Nothing." Li Yi poured a cup of tea and handed it over. He said, "Let's talk." "What do you want to talk about?" She looked up at Li Yi. "Just talk." Li Yi looked at her and said, "Like life, ideals and so on." Chapter 772. When talking about life and ideals with a beauty, the choice of time and place was very important. Under the warm yellow light, on the soft bed, chatting through the night, or in the quiet courtyard, next to a clean stone table, drinking a pot of fragrant tea, chatting leisurely. These were two completely different moods. Of course, the former was not about the moods. Hearing his words, the princess shook her head after a moment of hesitation, thinking that he was just joking. She changed the topic and said, "The aristocratic families that refused to donate money before have changed their attitude and donated more than those merchants." Li waved his hand and interrupted her. "I said we won't talk about this. Today, we only talk about life and ideals." Emingzu looked at him, and her expression was no longer serious. She picked up the teacup and took a sip, quietly waiting for him to continue. Li looked at her and asked, "Seriously, what's your plan for the future?" Emingzu thought for a while and said, "I'll settle the academy first. I've been busy for a long time." The future that Li mentioned was naturally more long-term than hers. He asked again, "What about 5 years later? 10 years later? 5 years later? 10 years later?" Emingzu was stunned. Under Li Yi's gaze, she shook her head and said, "It's too far away. I've never thought about it." She had no ambition. It was fine if she had big breasts but had no ambition. She had such a small breasts but had no ambition either. After the old emperor ascended, what would happen to the eldest princess who had lost her protection? It would be a happy ending for her to be betrothed to the son of a meritorious minister. With the power in her hands, it seemed unlikely that such a good ending would happen. She would most likely be suspected and coveted by others. Even if the king of Shu was not the emperor, he would be some other king. Speaking of which, if she continued to be a princess who was only responsible for her beautiful appearance, it was very likely that she would spend the rest of her life peacefully like most princesses in the history books. However, it was impossible for her to go back now that she had come this far. She thought about it carefully. How did she end up on this path? Her life was originally smooth and smooth. Cough, cough. Li took a sip of tea and choked on his own tea. After coughing twice, he waved his hand and said, "Forget it, forget it. If you haven't thought about it, then don't think about it. The most important thing in life is to be happy." It didn't matter how she came to this path. Since she couldn't turn back, she might as well walk this path to the end. It would be great if she could wait for the light of dawn, but if she couldn't, she would just rob it. As for the rest of the mess, who wanted to mess with it? As soon as his thoughts were clear, he felt as though his entire being had relaxed. When Emingzu looked at Li, she realized that he was also looking at her. His gaze was very strange. There was hope, worry, and love in his eyes. Behind those indescribable gazes, there was a kind of emotion that she could clearly feel. The will to fight. Although she didn't know why he would have such thoughts, at this moment, she felt that it was funny. She looked at Li with a faint smile and asked, "You want to fight with me?" Li was actually thinking that he might not be a match for the eldest princess at that time. Should he ask for a helper or something? He was startled when he heard that, and then laughed. "Are you kidding me? Why would I want to fight with you? The soup is still boiling in the kitchen. I'll go and see if it's ready. By the way, are you thirsty? Do you want me to serve you a bowl of soup?" Although he hadn't fought with her before, he was definitely not a match for someone who could fight with Mississippi Lu. Just the thought of fighting with her made him feel a dull pain in his butt again. The two little girls were better. Girls should be gentle and virtuous. Why should they learn martial arts? Although the words gentle and virtuous had nothing to do with the arrogant Lolita, they were both learning martial arts. Look at Rui. She was already a master, but she didn't use martial arts to bully others. Look at her and Mississippi Lu, who always talked about fighting with each other. How could they act like girls? Sir, come and play chess with me." The arrogant Lolita waved her hand in the room. Li walked over and replaced Duan Wu. As long as the word chess was involved, the arrogant Lolita couldn't be treated as a child. Even an adult would fall into her hands if they weren't careful. It was said that the old emperor had lost dozens of games to her. She was now obsessed with Gamoku. Ever since Li taught her this way of playing, the entire women's college, including the teachers and students, were unwilling to play with her in a few days. It was not easy to find someone who was willing to play chess with her. Li and the arrogant Lolita played chess. Yongning stood beside him with her hands behind her back and her head peeking at the chessboard. Thinking of something, Li looked at her and asked with a smile, "Cinny, If I'm going to a place far away and won't come back for a long time, would you be willing to go with me? The little girl was stunned for a moment. The expression on her little face immediately became nervous. She pulled Li Yi's arm and asked hurriedly, "Where are you going?" "A place far away from here. There might be no rocking cars, no merry-go-round, no delicious food, no fun. Wherever Big Brother goes, Xiane will go." Before Li Yi could finish, the little girl hugged his arm and said with a serious face. She clenched her fists tightly, as though she was worried that Li Yi would disappear if she let go. With her small heart, she could not imagine what the world would be like without her brother. No one would tell her the story of the beautiful sheep, and no one would understand what she said. They would think that Cindy was crazy, a bad child who lied. She was not willing to go back to the past. Li Yi touched her head lovingly and hugged her in his arms. He said, "Don't worry, wherever I go I will bring Cindy." The little girl nodded obediently and stretched out her little hand. Pinky swear. From her point of view, the matter of pinky swear was a promise that could not be changed. The arrogant Lolita looked at the opposite side vigilantly. Sir always said things that she did not understand to Yong Ning. Just now, he said that he was going to leave and pinky swear, but he did not say anything to her. Could it be that they wanted to elope behind my back? She looked at Li Yi and did not even call him sir anymore. She asked suspiciously, "Where are you going?" Li Yi looked at her and asked, "We are going to a very far place. Does Xiaoning want to go?" Although Mr. Wang said that there was nothing delicious or fun in the place they were going to, she didn't believe it at all. As long as Mr. Wang was there was nothing delicious or fun. Even if there was nothing, Mr. Wang could make it appear, just like before. However, if it was really far, her father would not agree. She hesitated and asked, "How far?" "Very, very far. It will take more than a month to walk out of the capital." Ah! The arrogant Lolita looked defeated. The farthest place she had been to was Sir's house. She could not imagine how far it would take more than a month to walk out of the capital. Her father would definitely not agree. She sighed and looked at Li Yi with some hidden bitterness in her eyes. "But father will not agree to me going to such a far place." Of course, Li Yi could not tell her that this was all after her father left. At that time, she would no longer be the carefree little princess she was now. She would have to face the ugliness of the adult world. Li Yi nodded and said, "Forget it. The place we are going to is very dangerous. We will have to fight mountain bandits and catch bandits with the heroes of Jianghu. You are a girl, it is better for you to stay in the palace." Fight mountain bandits and catch bandits? The arrogant Lolita suddenly widened her eyes and asked, "Like my royal sister, a heroine who catches bandits?" She had admired 3 people since she was young. One was her father, one was her teacher, and the last one was her very, very powerful royal sister. When she heard that her royal sister left the palace to become a heroine and catch bandits, she was extremely envious and pestered her to tell her stories of chivalry. She had long thought that when she grew up to her royal sister, she would also leave the palace to become a heroine and travel the Jianghu, punishing evil and eliminating traitors. Li Yi nodded. They were both going to catch bandits, but what they were going to do in the future was much more exciting than catching bandits. Father will definitely not agree. The arrogant Lolita's eyes darted around as she muttered. At a certain moment, she suddenly grabbed Li Yi's arm and said with a face full of expectation, "How about we elope without father knowing?" Li Yi looked at her in shock. At a certain moment, he suddenly felt very sinful. He felt like a bad uncle who kidnapped a little girl. Chapter 773. The proud Lolita was already 13 years old. In the future, 13-year-old girls already knew a lot of things. In this world, if a girl was born in a poor family, she would be able to support herself and even get married at the age of 13. However, the proud Lolita grew up in the palace. Among all the princes and princesses, she was the kind of person who was surrounded by the stars. She had never suffered much, so her mental age was obviously younger. Li Yi looked at her and explained helplessly, "Well, eloping requires 2 people who like each other first. Sir, don't you like Xiaoning?" The proud Lolita looked at him pitifully. Her big watery eyes blinked and she looked like she was about to cry. Li Yi covered his eyes and couldn't bear to look anymore. He nodded and said, "All right, I'll bring you along. Seeing that the proud Lolita was about to pounce on him, Li Yi hurriedly reached out his hand. Stop, play chess properly. The proud Lolita rolled her eyes at Li Yi and sat back. If he didn't let her kiss him, then so be it. After a while, they would elope together. Sir once wrote a poem. What was it again? If two people love each other for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? Since they were going to elope, one less kiss was no big deal. When he was in a good mood, his thoughts were naturally smooth. Even the speed at which he placed the chess pieces was much faster. Therefore, Li Yi soon realized that he was probably about to lose. Losing to his own disciple was a very embarrassing thing. Li Yi decided to concentrate and see if he could salvage the situation. Look, what's that? His face suddenly showed a look of surprise and pointed behind the proud Lolita. The proud Lolita turned her head and looked for a while before turning back with some dissatisfaction and muttering, What? There's clearly nothing. She picked up a chess piece and was about to put it on the position that she had chosen just now. As long as this chess piece was placed, Sir would lose. However, her hand had only landed halfway when she looked at the chessboard in a daze with a puzzled expression. Shanning's Gamoku is getting better and better, but don't be proud. Continue to work hard. Li Yi smiled and patted her little head. He stood up and walked out of the house. Sir, you cheated. After a moment of silence, a crisp sound rang out. A petite figure pounced over from behind. After a while, Li Yi shook his head and turned his collar up a little to hide the shallow bite marks on his neck. He did not know where she learned this from. She grabbed the neck and bit it. Although it was not heavy, if others saw it, it would be inappropriate for a princess to do so. How could an unmarried princess be so intimate with a man? He might even be mistaken for having a bad intention of abducting the princess. After the matter of the academy was completely settled, there were people to take care of everything. After sending away the arrogant Lolita, he had a lot of free time. He thought that after dinner, he would accompany Rui to the school of divination. The scenery by the lake was good, and fishing in the pavilion in the middle of the lake would be a small pleasure. He of Chong'an and County Dean of Chong'an College, but had a free time. That. In the past few days, the gate of the county government was almost broken by people. Of course, they didn't come to complain, but to give money. After the morning assembly that day, all the officials and aristocratic families in the capital city sent their servants to the county government to register. The amount of silver they donated increased from thousands to tens of thousands. In 2 days, the amount had reached millions of silver. Of course, not only did they donate silver, but they also donated materials, mostly books. Whether the academy could use them or not, he accepted them all. This matter was well done, and he didn't disappoint the eldest princess and Lord Li. County Magistrate Liu waved to a runner happily and pointed to the red paper on the table. He said, Come on, put this one up too. The outer wall of the county government had been covered with red paper. The black ink on the red paper was particularly conspicuous. It was a detailed record of the donations of the big families every day. After it was arranged according to the amount, it was posted outside the county government, attracting the attention of countless people. In this way, the families who had been watching could not sit still, and the families who donated less could not sit still. Those who didn't donate could hide for a while, but sooner or later, they would be found out and regarded as the example of the heartless rich. Those who donated less would be ranked behind most of the families. They would lose face and might as well not donate at all. They could only increase the amount to improve their ranking. But in their hearts, they cursed the person who came up with such a bad idea. Fortunately, the reputation of the family could be preserved. The loss of some silver was just a loss, but the foundation of the family couldn't be lost. But some people weren't so lucky. Although the Chui clan and several clans that were on good terms with the Chui clan had also donated silver, at the beginning, when the officials of the Ministry of Rights visited them, they had offended them a lot, and even donated the humiliating price of 50 taels of silver. Later, they were exposed to be extravagant and wasteful in other aspects, which greatly damaged their reputation. Even if they had taken remedial measures afterward and donated a lot of silver, it was difficult for them to recover the lost part of their reputation. The eldest princess once again showed her ability in front of the public. Although she didn't do it casually, it made the whole capital city, and the whole Jing kingdom in the future, excited. No one knew where he found those mad scientists, but he didn't need to supervise them at all. He only went to check the progress every once in a while. Most of the time, he was in the mathematics academy. At this time, he and the young man named Shen Shu, whom Li Yi had met once or twice, were sitting in the pavilion in front of them. They seemed to be studying some profound problem. Li Yi looked at the booklet in his hand. It was the one he had given him before. There was some basic physical and chemical knowledge in it. It was hard to imagine that besides Li Xian, there was actually someone who was interested in these things. No wonder Li Xian could stick with him all day long. From the day that Princess Shixi was found to be pregnant, she was taken to the palace by the Empress. Li Xian had to get the Empress's permission to see her. Except for Princess Shixi, he didn't have any other concubines. For such a long time, he didn't find a woman, but found a man. This was really worrying. Chapter 774. He didn't know what the two of them were studying, but they seemed to be very engrossed. When Li Yi and Rui walked past them, Li Xian didn't even notice. Li Yi couldn't help but sigh. Li Xian's bad habit of being more interested in men than women hadn't been changed even after they got married. Rui turned to look at him and asked in confusion, "Why are you sighing, husband?" Li Yi shook his head and sighed at the degeneration of morality in the world. Even Li Xian couldn't avoid it. He said, "How can two men stick to each other all day long? Aren't you afraid of being laughed at?" "What's there to laugh at?" Rui was startled. Even if there were no women in the school, it was very normal for classmates to discuss problems. It would be improper if they were really accompanied by women all day long. She looked back and said, "Moreover, how do you know that they are two men?" "What do you mean?" Li Yi was shocked when he heard this. Could it be that during the time when he was not in the capital, Li Xian actually... Impossible, there was no such magical technology in this era. He looked at Rui and said in surprise, "My wife, do you mean that Shen Shu is a woman?" Thinking about the last time he saw Shen Shu, he found that he was a little effeminate. As for whether he had an Adam's apple or not, he really didn't notice it. After all, he didn't look at him carefully. Besides, scholars in this era tended to be a little submissive. Some people didn't have an obvious Adam's apple, so he didn't have the preconceived idea that she was a man. So Li Yi felt that what Rui said was very likely. Rui nodded and said, "When she came to our house last time, I found that this young Master Shen should be a woman dressed as a man." Li Yi had previously ridiculed the TV series for not being able to see women dressed as men. Now it seemed that it was not the case in the TV series at all. Unless they were really familiar with each other to a certain extent, it was really not easy for a woman to be recognized after dressing up seriously. Although the status of women in the Jing Kingdom had improved a little, the barrier between men and women was still the same. Even if the academy only accepted men, he would have to think of other ways to get in. Chen Su. A figure immediately appeared in Li Yi's mind. This idiot can't even figure out whether it's a man or a woman, and still boasts that young Master Shen is very smart in front of me all day. Li Yi doesn't intend to expose her. It's better to let Li Xian discover this kind of thing by himself. The two of them found a secluded spot by the lake and sat down. The students were in class, and the academy quieted down. A gentle breeze blew across the surface of the lake, causing the ripples to ripple. Holding hands with her, the whole world seemed to become quiet. Quiet and tranquil. "My husband, do you like boys or girls?" Rui suddenly asked. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Girls." Rui asked, "Why?" "Girls are like wives, so they must be very obedient. But you have to be careful, and you can't let Rui lead them astray." "My husband, please don't let Rui hear what you said." Li Yi turned his head and looked around. Mississippi Lu didn't follow him out today, so she shouldn't suddenly appear. Then he turned back, curled his lips and said, "So what if she hears it? Do you think I will be afraid of her?" His eyes inadvertently looked around again, and he finally completely relaxed. Rui looked at the lake and murmured, "In a few days, Rui will be 18 years old." Mississippi Lu wasn't 18 years old yet, which meant that he couldn't even defeat a child. Realizing that the Princess Royal didn't seem to be 18 years old, Li suddenly felt a little sour in his heart. Rui continued, "She won't tell me some things in her heart. In a few years she will be married, and I don't know if she has a crush on someone." Although Rui was Mississippi Lu's sister in name, Their mother passed away early, and the elder sister was like a mother. She was only 2 years older than Mississippi Lu, but she played the role of an elder sister and a mother since they were young. We don't have to worry about these things for her. She is so good at martial arts, and she is proud and arrogant. She won't like men who are not as good as her. But above that, the only people who are better than her are those grandmasters who are older. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "At worst, I will raise her for the rest of her life, as long as she changes her bad habit of squandering. Actually, I can't bear to be separated from her." Rui smiled and said, "When Mom and Dad were still alive, Rui was still very young and hadn't started practicing martial arts. She followed me all day and made a promise with me in the future." "Promise what?" Li Yi's ears pricked up. He rarely heard about Mississippi Lu's childhood from Rui. If he could find out something embarrassing about her, he would have a bargaining chip next time and wouldn't be so passive all the time. "Nothing." Thinking of that ridiculous thing, Rui smiled and shook her head. Li Yi was a little disappointed. When did Rui learn to keep him in suspense? No, he had to ask Xiaofan when he got back. But Xiaofan was about the same age as Mississippi Lu, and she was always muddle-headed. She might not be very clear, so he had to find a chance to ask Mississippi Lu indirectly. The servant girl drank a mouthful of soup and shook her head. She said, "I've never heard Miss and Second Miss talk about it. Xiaofan doesn't know what kind of promise Miss and Second Miss have." She blinked her eyes and looked at Li Yi. Puzzled, she asked, "Why don't son-in-law ask Miss?" If Rui was willing to tell him, he wouldn't have to come and ask Xiaofan. Li Yi patted her little head and said, "Good girl, drink more soup. It's good for your body." The servant girl nodded and rubbed her slightly bloated belly. The soup that son-in-law made was very delicious, but if she drank too much, her chest would always swell. It felt a little strange. It wasn't really uncomfortable, but that place always made people feel embarrassed to talk about it, let alone talk about it to son-in-law. Was this what son-in-law meant by growing up? When Li Yi walked out of the door, Mississippi Lu was wiping her eyes. Li Yi felt that she treated the sword better than him. If he and the sword fell into the water at the same time, Mississippi Lu would definitely choose to fish for the sword instead of him. What kind of unspeakable promise did she and Rui have? This question had been on his mind since yesterday. If he didn't ask, he would feel uncomfortable. So, Li Yi decided to ask in a roundabout way. Li Yi walked to her side and asked curiously, "What kind of promise did you and Rui have when you were young?" "What promise?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him and continued to bury her head in wiping her eyes. She only asked blandly. Looking at her appearance, she seemed to have completely forgotten about this matter. It seemed like it wasn't important. Li Yi shook his head. His curiosity was greatly reduced. Instead, he was puzzled as to why Rui would be secretive about something that wasn't important. "It's nothing. You can continue. I'm going to cook." He didn't want Mississippi Lu to know that he was prying into her privacy. He turned around and walked in the direction of the kitchen. "Promise? That's strange." Mississippi Lu looked up at him and murmured. When she lowered her head again, she seemed to have thought of something. Her hands suddenly stopped moving and her body stiffened. "Promise?" At this moment, a memory that was long ago but engraved in the depths of her mind quietly emerged. Before Li Yi could step into the kitchen, a white shadow flashed in front of him. Mississippi Lu instantly appeared in front of him. She looked at him with a face full of embarrassment and annoyance. "What do you know?" "What do you mean?" Li Yi looked at her in surprise and asked in confusion. Mississippi Lu stared at his face closely. When she found that there was nothing but confusion on his face, she finally felt relieved. It seemed that he just did it unintentionally. At this moment, he had forgotten about what just happened. "Nothing." She waved her hand and turned to leave. "Wait." Li Yi stopped her in time. When she turned around, he asked curiously, "What on earth did you two promise?" You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.